Hey everybody, welcome on our channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto got trained by Sith Lords and learned all the affinities? Part 2. If you are new on the channel, don't forget to subscribe our channel and like the video too. So without wasting any more time, let's start the story. Plagiaris continued to plan a strategy for what to do. He had always been a planner and never jumped into anything without thinking it out. Most of the thoughts that went through his head concerned the blonde boy in the Bacta tank in front of him. It had been minutes since he discovered that the boy had no midi-chlorians, and since then he had run every test that he could with the instruments that he had. The boy's recovery rate was phenomenal. So far, there was no hint of infection, and despite having several of his organs damaged, they were repairing themselves with the aid of the Bacta. The boy was fast on his way to recovery from wounds and damage that would have killed others. The only thing he could find wrong with the boy was some malnutrition. Plagiaris determined that the boy had several differences compared with regular humans. His body was stronger and had the potential to gain immense strength due to differences in the muscle tissue. His joints were far stronger and durable, meaning that he could survive immense falls and land without a problem. His nervous system was superior, as was his hand-eye coordination, and he could probably react faster than a normal human. The reasoning for these differences most likely had to do with whatever energy and energy field that his body was producing. He thought he felt something off about the boy when he first felt him, and it was actually the boy's energy field which wasn't repelling the energy field of the force, but was actually a barrier to it and prevented it from entering the boy's body. It was similar to a person wearing a raincoat while walking through a rainstorm and never getting wet. The coat wasn't forcing the water away from the body, but was a barrier that inhibited it from getting the person wet. The boy's energy was exiting his body through various regulatory points along the pathway and creating the energy field which kept the energy field of the force away from him. This created a small buildup of the force on the barrier, which had led to him believing that it was minor force sensitivity. If he tried to sense beyond the barrier, he would have found a void in the force. Plagiaris found it difficult to actually sense the boy's energy, as it was similar to the force, but different enough that he had to try rather hard to sense it, and he deduced that his current proximity to the boy also played a factor. Plagiaris' thoughts then turned to what he would do after the boy woke up. He would have to determine everything that he could about the boy while asleep and probe his mind before making a decision. If possible, he wanted to learn as much as possible about the energy the boy had and would offer his own knowledge about the ship and possibly universe in exchange. The boy obviously had no need to learn the force, as his body couldn't use it, but he was incredibly curious about the starship and would probably either tell Plagiaris everything that he wanted to know or acquire this information for him. However, the boy was still rather young, and it was definitely possible that he didn't know much about the energy that his body produced. Moving towards the Bacta tank, Plagiaris extended his arm. It phased through the tube as he was a spirit and no longer had a physical body. He had to concentrate in order for his hand to become solid again and make physical contact with the boy's head. Using his abilities in draining knowledge and reading thoughts, Plagiaris searched the boy's mind to find the information that he is looking for. While using these techniques, he began to feel a pulling sensation. Initially he tried to resist, but the pull got stronger and he found it difficult to concentrate on searching for the information he wanted while also resisting the unknown force. Giving into his curiosity, Plagiaris stopped resisting the pull. A moment later, Plagiaris found himself in an underground tunnel system or sewer. No longer an apparition, he discovered that he had a complete body and feet to move. The sewer had several inches of water and he was instantly aware that he wasn't alone. For a brief moment, he wondered if what he was feeling was the boy, but it felt different. Where I am? Were his thoughts, as he knew that this wasn't the boy's mind. Gliding through the water and towards the disturbance that he felt, he passed many dark passageways off the main corridor that he was on. Following the disturbance, he made a turn off the main route and entered a very large room. Before him was a large golden gate with many bars which stretched up to the darkened ceiling high above. The water extended into the cage, and Plagiaris was aware that he was being watched. One large red eye was open in the cage, and the slit red pupil was watching him. He couldn't make out just what the eye was attached to, as the darkness in the cage shrouded whatever was watching him. Not knowing anything about the creature before him or why exactly it was caged inside of the boy, he asked it a question: "Where am I?" Plagiaris wasn't sure if he would get a response to his question, but a moment later, a deep voice responded in an unfamiliar language. Surprised, Plagiaris took a moment to determine what he should do. Since the creature was able to talk, it would be beneficial to find out everything that it knew. However, he would first need to solve the language barrier. He could have used his abilities on the creature, but thought better of it as he knew nothing about it or what it was capable of. Plagiaris could clearly feel its malevolence and power, which greatly surpassed his own and anything that he had ever encountered before. It was a good idea not to anger it until he knew more. Walking out of the room, Plagueis looked down the directions that he could take, he used the force to make a decision and went in the direction that he didn't come from. He was looking for the boy's mind, but that room obviously wasn't it. He surmised that this was some type of representation of the boy's body and therefore he had to follow the pathways to get to the mind. Normally the techniques that he used didn't involve anything like what he was experiencing. He usually probed the mind while staying in his own body spirit and not having his consciousness pulled into the being he was probing. Then again, the boy wasn't connected to the force and had a unique energy produced by his own body, so there were bound to be differences. Plagueis walked through the sewer until he found the correct passage that he was looking for. He stepped into the darkness of the passageway. Emerging into another room, he found a small edge and a very large body of water in front of him. Inside of the water was what he was looking for. A set of stairs led right into the water so he walked down them. Plagueis found that he didn't need to breathe and the water offered almost no resistance to him. He walked forward and got closer to the very large brain that the force told him was here. It was the representation of all the boy's knowledge and thoughts and had several large scrolls inserted into it. All Plagueis needed to do was place his hand on it and find the information that he wanted. Plagueis once again entered the room with the cage. The eye once again opened to stare at him and he again asked his question, but this time in the same language as the creature and boy used, "Where is this place?" After hearing a brief chuckling from the create, it responded with, "Inside of the seal." Plagueis was confused by this as he didn't know what the creature meant by seal, but he didn't let it bother him as he would find out eventually. "What exactly are you? I can't see anything except your eye, but I'm quite sure I've never seen anything similar to you," admitted Plagueis as he remained honest until such time as he would need to tell a lie or hold information back. The creature chuckled again and said, "I could ask you the very same question. You don't look or feel like the humans I've seen. I am the QB no Kitsune." And an outline of the creature was revealed when it manipulated its own energy which poured off its body in a deep red color. Plagueis was curious about the name as it sounded more like a title, but the display of power was the most intriguing aspect of their exchange. The sheer hatred and malice that poured off the creature was astounding. It isn't even displaying the full power available to it. He realized but wasn't going to show any signs that he was intimidated. From what he could tell with the force, the beast was rather intelligent and he might be able to subdue it with the force while it was in its cage, but he knew he couldn't fight it if it was not in the cage. It would be best to talk with it before trying anything else. He reasoned. Plagueis tried to categorize the creature from things that he had heard about but nothing compared. It seemed to be composed of the same energy the boy had, but it was infinitely more powerful and possessed a sharp mind from what Plagueis could determine with the force. If Plagueis didn't know any better, he would have thought that it was a being composed entirely of the dark side. "I am known as Darth Plagueis, Lord of the Sith. I am not exactly from around these parts, so I have never heard of you before. I would like to know about you and hear anything that you would care to talk about. Especially concerning this planet and the power that its people, as well as you yourself, possess," said Plagueis. A few minutes earlier, inside of the seal. The QB opened one of its eyes to see who had come to visit him. He didn't think it was his container as he could feel great malice and hatred coming from the figure, but he knew it wasn't Uchiha Madara or anyone else that he had ever encountered before. The figure entered the room with the cage and then spoke in an unknown language. The QB answered with, "Speak some sense or leave," in a dull voice. It was rather curious though as it never expected anyone to enter the seal for quite some time to come and wondered why did they speak another language. The strangest part was that this person also didn't seem to have chakra but possessed something else. The man left and went out of the seal into the boy's mind. The QB was slightly concerned as if the boy died then he would die. He had already felt his jailer nearly die from some unknown attack. He thought perhaps the man could have been responsible but was unsure. There wasn't anything he could do as his jailer had yet to access any of his chakra and the seal was as solid as when it was first placed. He just hoped that his runt of a jailer wouldn't get himself killed by doing something stupid. It was embarrassing enough to have such a child as his container. After a period of time, the man returned, but this time spoke in words that the QB could understand. They conversed for quite some time. Hours passed while they spoke of many different topics. The QB had been interested to know about the galaxy and all of the other planets and species that inhabited it. He rather enjoyed it when he was told by Plagueis that he had seen or heard of no other being that could rival his power in the galaxy. In turn, the QB provided information about the boy and about chakra. He told Plagueis about what it could do, how it was made, and about the ninjas that used it. The seal was mentioned in Fuinjutsu, along with information about the boy's parents. Plagueis had been unable to find much about this knowledge while looking through the boy's mind, so this information was very valuable. Plagueis left after his most immediate questions were answered, but said that he would return to talk again. The QB was actually looking forward to it. Back in the ship. Opening his eyes, Plagueis found himself back in his spirit form. He idly noticed that the blood transfusion bag was just as full as when he had left and asked the droid about it. To his surprise, the droid responded that it was the same bag that he started with. Asking the droid again, this time about how long he had been in contact with the boy, the droid responded that he touched the boy's head for only a few seconds. I spent hours talking with a vulpine creature, yet only seconds passed out here. How interesting. He thought as his mind starting working on how he could use this to his advantage. He also noticed that although he was inside the boy's mind, his body there still retained his connection to the Force. It probably had something to do with my spirit being in contact with the boy. He believed that the barrier the boy's energy field created wasn't very powerful and could be pierced by the Force, given some coaxing, but under normal circumstances wouldn't. If he was going to get back to the rest of the galaxy or at least some form of civilization, he would need several things to happen and a good amount of preparation. Plagueis wanted to study this planet, as well as its mysteries, as much as possible, but he really didn't have the equipment or resources to do this. Therefore he would have to get back to the known galaxy and acquire such resources. He had a ship, but it didn't have any fuel, at least not enough to even get him off the planet. More fuel would have to be created or another power source obtained. The level of technology that the planet possessed was rather primitive, and it would be exceedingly difficult to find any power source that would be able to power the ship. Plagueis just hoped that the fuel wasn't something incredibly exotic like hypermatter. It was also possible that the crash had damaged the ship in some way. Everything would have to be thoroughly checked. As much as he didn't want to admit it, he would need help. Someone would have to work on getting the fuel or alternative power source and determine if anything was damaged on the ship. Plagueis would also need someone to pilot the ship as he couldn't do it and a medical droid wasn't suited for that kind of task. The boy in the Bacta tank could provide what he needed. He wouldn't really be an apprentice, but more like an assistant, servant, or pawn. He would need to teach the boy though, which could take a while, and in meantime he could have the boy bring him more information about chakra and jutsu. An arrangement could easily be made with seemingly mutually beneficial terms. From what Plagueis could tell from the boy's mind, he was desperate to be noticed and acknowledged by anyone and everyone around him. He also had much hatred for the villagers, but had fixated the dream of trying to get them to acknowledge him and becoming the leader of the village. The boy had chosen all the wrong reasons to do this. He had no idea what would be in store for him in running a village of any size, and it was a foolish dream of a child seeking attention. Even with the determination that the boy had, deep down he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to do it. The boy buried all of these doubts, anger and hatred, but it couldn't be gotten rid of and was therefore Plagueis to find. It would be rather easy for him to play on those fears and hatred. He could turn the boy into his servant and against the village that hated him. Plagueis had all the information that he needed to do it. The QB creature had been most helpful, as were the boy's own memories. It seemed as though the Force had provided him with all that he needed to solve the problems that he was facing. If only the boy could have been a little smarter. Inside of Naruto's body. As new blood flowed into Naruto's veins, his body had decided that it was foreign, as the cells had no chakra and therefore could be dangerous. So it sought to neutralize the incoming cells. The cells, which were full of midi-chlorians, were destroyed one by one. Instead of just dying though, the remains of the cells were recycled to help the body. While midi-chlorians were not transferable to another person and Force sensitivity couldn't be acquired through a blood transfusion, Naruto's body didn't know that or cared as it started using the leftover cell mass to repair its damaged areas. Chakra poured into the damaged areas and went to work repairing them. The midi-chlorians present in the cells were attracted to the chakra, specifically the chakra network, and they were either placed into damaged cells or hitched a ride on the chakra pathways and followed them to new cells that were undamaged. Apparently the midi-chlorians liked their new home, but they were unable to feel a connection with the Force, so they lied dormant. More blood had been transferred into Naruto, as the monitors indicated that the initial amount wasn't enough, and his red blood cell count was still rather low. As more foreign blood entered his body, the same process happened until every cell in his body had midi-chlorians in them. At some point, the process stopped though. It was as if the midi-chlorians had decided that they didn't want a higher concentration in the cells they were in. Also the GD blood that was being used had run out and the blood another Force sensitive was being used. Perhaps the midi-chlorians from the GD just didn't want to share their cells with other midi-chlorians from someone else. This process would ultimately leave Naruto with somewhere around 9,000 midi-chlorians per cell in his body, which was that of a GD who had average Force sensitivity. When the midi-chlorians first entered his cells, they were not able to feel the Force due to the barrier caused by the energy field produced by the boy's body. However, that all changed when Plagueis made physical contact with the boy. When Plagueis entered the boy's mindscape, he was able to use the Force because he brought it through the barrier. While the barrier was able to stop the Force from entering Naruto's body, it was by no means a brick wall. It wasn't very rigid or sturdy at all. Plagueis's trip into Naruto's sealant mind created an opening in that barrier. The midi-chlorians weren't able to bring the force to them because all of the force energy that entered was being used by Plagueis, but once he was finished, a brief opening in the barrier was left. The opening started closing, but it was enough for the midi-chlorians that were in the cells to feel the force and pull it to them. As more midi-chlorians entered and became part of Naruto's body, more force flowed through the hole in the barrier, and the midi-chlorians were able to alter the barrier to allow the force to enter without being hindered. It would take several hours for this entire process to finish. After that time had passed, Naruto would be able to feel and manipulate the force without problems when he woke up. The force now would naturally flow through his body. Just like anyone else from the rest of the known galaxy. Plagueis had been silently plotting his next steps for over an hour. The problem he faced was that he needed the boy's help, but he was a Sith and wasn't going to admit that he needed anyone's help. He determined what he was going to talk about with the boy and what things to say in order to bring the boy over to his side. The only obstacle that he could think of was that the boy was rather superstitious in that he was terribly afraid of ghosts. Plagueis was a spirit but had the exact look of a classic ghost. The effect was only worsened by the fact that he wasn't human. He was immune, so he couldn't show his face at all until after explaining things and would need to remain cloaked. From looking through his memories, Plagueis knew that the boy had never even considered the thought that the stars in the sky were part of other systems with planets and different species. Possibly no one from his planet had that thought either. It was a lot to take in, but with everything combined together, it was definitely enough to scare the boy off. He didn't want the boy to run screaming off the ship and never return, or worse, run screaming off the ship and bring others back. The last thing that Plagueis wanted was to be used or have his holocron destroyed, as it was the only thing keeping him in this world. His force powers were limited at best, and he really didn't have a good way to defend himself. The powers of Sith spirits always varied. It depended on many factors which included the power of the person before they died, how much anger they held onto, and the location where they were at. If they were in an area strong in the dark side, then the spirits would be stronger. Plagueis was not in a favorable position at all. He would have to use the holocron to his advantage. The hologram it produced was an image of the upper portion of his body and would allow him to speak through it while his spirit watched from the shadows and stayed out of sight. Plagueis had no doubt in his mind that the activated holocron would catch the boy's attention and interest. It was during this contemplation that he began to feel something. He didn't even register it at first because he was so deep in thought, but as it grew, he finally took notice of it. Turning to the back to tank, he felt with the force and found something rather strange. The boy's energy field was no longer impeding the force. That doesn't make any sense. He thought and cautiously approached the tank. The boy was still unconscious, but he could feel the force moving through him, and yet the other energy was still there as well. Curious, he told the droid to collect another blood sample and perform another midi-chlorian count. The droid confirmed Plagueis' suspicions when it told him that the blood tested at an average of 9,000 midi-chlorians per cell. The boy goes from no midi-chlorians to 9,000 in a matter of hours. I would say that it was impossible, but I've had a great many impossibilities happen today. Now I have something else to consider. He thought as he stared at the tank. If the boy was able to use the force, then he could make him his apprentice. However, it was against the rules of the Sith, though Sidious had killed him in the Rite of Ascension and was now a master of the Sith and would train his own apprentice. The rule of two didn't necessarily account for a situation like this though. I would have to gain more of the boy's trust and loyalty if I was to teach him the ways of the Force, as well as just teaching him about technology. It would also be better as he could protect the ship and himself with the Force, especially since I know little of using chakra. Perhaps he won't be my apprentice, but maybe a Sith acolyte or something along those lines. I wouldn't teach him enough to be a true apprentice. I am very curious to see what he would be capable of with the Force and this other power that he has. Decided Plagueis, and he made his decision, he would train the boy. Naruto's eyes opened to look up at a strange light fixture that he had never seen before. He looked around and found himself in the room that he told himself he would never go back into. The suit of armor was gone. He sat up and examined himself as memories of what happened flooded back to him. He quickly checked his nose, eyes, and ears, but no blood was present. There wasn't even any dried blood either. He felt a little strange and he had a bad headache. Thinking perhaps it had all been a dream, he got off the table and his stomach growled. How long had it been since he had eaten? As he left the infirmary, he never stopped to think how he had gotten on the table in the first place as he had fallen on the floor. Food was the only thing he had on his mind now. Walking into the hallway, he was about to go back to the tube that he had come through so he could get back home when he noticed a light down the hallway. The light was in the area with the table and seats, but the room lights weren't on. Cautiously, Naruto walked down the hallway and the lights in the room turned on with his movement, but this no longer surprised him. He looked at the table and saw that the pyramid object that he had earlier was sitting on the table and it was glowing red. Above the object, the image of a person was detailed in the red light. The individual was cloaked and Naruto could barely make out his chin, let alone the rest of his face. There was no way to determine what he actually looked like or skin tone because the hologram was just a shade of red. The image was only 10 or so inches high and the figure seemed to be staring at him. Naruto was incredibly curious as he had never seen anything like what the pyramid was doing. The hologram sat still as Naruto slowly approached. Before Naruto reached the table, it spoke, "Greetings, young one." It said in a dull nasally voice. Naruto jumped when he heard the voice and looked around the room until his eyes came back to the hologram. He didn't know what to think about the device, it seemed similar to his television, but it didn't have a screen and was red. He then began to wonder how it managed to get out here when he was sure he left it somewhere else. "Yes, I am talking to you from this device and no, I am not some type of recording." Naruto for his part just stared at the device. "How?" Naruto started but he was interrupted by the voice. "At this point, it would be a waste of time to explain it to you as you don't have any grasp on technology, especially something so advanced as this. You should just talk to me like I was any normal person as I can see and hear you as well as you can see and hear me," stated the voice and the image barely moved. "Who are you?" Naruto asked while not taking his eyes away from the device. He was rather suspicious of it and afraid of what was going on. "Ah yes. Your customs are too for me to introduce myself and then you reciprocate. My name is Darth Plagueis, Lord of the Sith," it stated. Naruto stared at the device for a second as he didn't know what reciprocate meant or what the man's title meant, so he just gave his name as well, Uzumaki Naruto. Future Hokage. The image didn't move, but Plagueis tried not to roll his eyes at the response. "Well Naruto, it seems that you have stumbled onto something. I knew it was important." Naruto yelled in triumph and Plagueis' image tried to remain calm. "Actually it isn't and it does belong to me," he stated and the boy quieted down immediately. "You probably thought that this ship was worth something, but I'm afraid to tell you that it isn't something that can be sold since it wouldn't have a price. It is an interesting discovery, but you can't sell it to anyone because it belongs to me. If you told anyone, they might try and steal it from me, especially the government of your village. They would probably keep it a secret and take everything that I have for themselves," stated Plagueis. Naruto was sure whether he wanted to believe what the image said or not. Would the old man really take this away from Plagueis and keep everything a secret? He didn't think so but wasn't sure. Naruto did have a question about something the man had said. "Wait, you said ship. So it is a boat?" asked Naruto confused. "No, this ship is far more advanced than a simple boat. It's meant for something much more amazing than that," said Plagueis. "So what is it, what does it do, can I see it in action?" asked Naruto all at once. Plagueis didn't allow the image to show his inner smirk and said, "I'm afraid not. You see, it isn't working right now and would need to be fixed first. And it's not worth anything." "No, I'm afraid not and I'm not selling it. Besides, it's far too heavy to remove from the lake bed anyway and no one else would even know what to do with it." "What about that golden necklace?" Naruto protested. "You mean the one that nearly killed you?" Which caused Naruto to instantly quiet in shock and Plagueis continued, "Yes, the memories that you have are true. You nearly died from putting it on. That necklace has a very powerful and deadly curse associated with it and if it wasn't for me then you would have died. I acquired it some time ago and tried to put it away safely in those boxes, but evidently it wasn't safe enough," he stated. Thanks, I guess and I'm sorry," stated Naruto while looking away from the image and down at the floor. Plagueis merely nodded his head. "It's alright, no harm done," he stated as he was first trying to build up some trust between them and make sure that Naruto wouldn't tell anyone about the ship as he was playing it off as being rather worthless. It wasn't a lie though. No one in his village would be able to use the ship and they might not even be able to get it out of the lake, much less back to the village for study. "I was wondering would you like to learn more about this ship and its workings? I could teach you," inquired Plagueis. Naruto's eyes widened at the statement, "He would teach me something." "You teach me?" Naruto blurted out. "Yes, of course I would be willing to teach you. After all, you did discover this ship and took the time to learn to swim and investigate it to get here. It's the least I could do. However, you would have to keep this as our little secret. I wouldn't want anyone else to find out. They might get jealous or not think you deserve to learn what I can teach you. I've seen the way they look at you in the village. You definitely don't deserve it," stated Plagueis in the most fake sincere voice that he could. Naruto was surprised to hear about the offer and saddened when Plagueis mentioned the villagers and his treatment in the village. Would they really stop me from coming here to learn? Naruto never even stopped to think of how it was that Plagueis knew about the villagers and the way they treat him. Plagueis could see that he was slowly winning over the boy and he had plenty of ammunition left. No one deserves to be treated like that, especially for something that they didn't do and that wasn't even their fault. Naruto instantly looked up at the statement, he knows why they hate me. Why? Why do they all look down on me and treat me the way they do? Tell me, yelled Naruto desperately as he had wanted to know for years. Oh, you mean you don't know? They never told you? Plagueis asked in as surprised and concerned a voice as he could manage. They? Was Naruto's response as he didn't understand why it was a plural. Yes, the whole village has a reason why they hate you so much, but I'm surprised they never bothered to even tell you. Not even the Hokage told you about it? Asked Plagueis with fake shock. The old man knows too. How terrible, the man you trusted the most didn't want to tell you why the entire village hates you. I suppose he had his reasons though. It's his fault why they all know in the first place. Stated Plagueis. Naruto was about to say something when the words died in his mouth. The old man knew all along and he just lied to me over and over again. Why is it his fault that the village knows? Thought Naruto, but he wanted to know why the villagers hated him first. That question had been eating away at him for years. Why do they hate me? Tell me, Naruto yelled, but the end part came out as more of an order. Plagueis was slightly taken by surprise as the boy had actually used the force in his words to make them an order and it would have actually coerced a civilian to tell him what he wanted to know. It didn't work on Plagueis though, but it was still interesting. He could feel the anger building in the boy and knew exactly how to bring it to the surface. You see, started Plagueis, and he continued to explain the details of the sealing, the QB, and even showed him the seal on his stomach for proof. He had gotten the information straight from the source and a little bit more. The Vulpine was aware of a few things that went on outside of the seal. It was aware that the Hokage had given a speech concerning the sealing of it into the boy because of all the hatred and malice that had been directed at its container on that night. It knew exactly what the Hokage had said and the reaction from the village. Plagueis explained everything about the sealing to Naruto as best as he could. He himself had barely learned about only a few hours ago, but had no difficulty explaining it to a child. The nuances still eluded him, but the boy didn't need such exact details at the moment. After the explanation on the sealing, he retold what the QP had told him about the Sandaime, telling the entire village about the sealing. Why? Naruto said at the end of the speech, and Plagueis could tell that the single word was grasping for many different answers. I'm afraid he just doesn't trust you enough. The Hokage must not think you can keep a secret like that and just lied to make you stop questioning it. I'm not sure why he told all the villagers about the sealing, it seems rather imbecilic thing to do to a child. As for the villagers, I think that has to do with the Hokage trying to keep them quiet to cover up for his mistake. I'm not completely positive on that though, but it does make sense. Whatever it is, it certainly doesn't stop them from treating you like dirt or prevent them from hurting you. And this burden that you were forced to bear certainly doesn't give them the right to treat you so horribly. Stated Plagueis in a kind tone. No, it doesn't. Thought Naruto as he had many close calls with the villagers at the time of his birthday. In general, the majority of the village had treated him horribly. He was incredibly saddened by what he was told, but he was also angry. If the villagers knew that it wasn't his fault, then why did they hate him so much? He didn't choose to have the QP sealed inside of him. It was all the Yondaime's doing, yet they praised him for doing it. It wasn't fair and it pissed him off. As much as Plagueis wanted the boy's anger to come to the surface and fester, he had other business to take care of as well. Regardless, I would still be willing to teach you what I know about this ship. Unlike the village and Hokage, your burden doesn't bother me. I might even teach you more than that. I happen to know of very special abilities that aren't possessed by just anyone. I can tell that you have the gift and I could teach you how to use those abilities if you would help me in return. Suggested Plagueis. What would I have to help you with? Asked Naruto as he was very interested in learning jutsu and if this guy, or whatever the heck he was offering to teach him, then he wanted to know what he had to do. Well, as I said before, this ship is rather damaged and I would need some help repairing it. That is where the knowledge that I wanted to teach you about the ship comes in. I would teach you about it and then you might be able to help me. I would even be willing to teach you about the abilities that I know. How does that sound? Asked Plagueis in a serious voice. So, you teach me about jutsu and stuff? Asked Naruto and Plagueis responded, I'm afraid not. I really don't know much about chakra or jutsu. What I'm willing to teach you is different from these things, but very unique in its own way. I can guarantee that no one in the village has ever seen or knows about what I can teach. It would be something of your very own. Of course you would have to keep this a secret between us. If people found out about you learning something that they know nothing about, they would be incredibly jealous. I doubt that anyone would want you to know something so unique. They would probably demand that someone else be taught, someone who was more deserving in their eyes. You shouldn't mention it to the Hokage either, as I'm not sure if he would want you learning from me either. Would these abilities make me powerful? Asked Naruto seriously. Yes, you could become quite powerful from learning and using what I can teach you. You could even still learn chakra and jutsu as well. You'd be able to have something that no one else did, said Plagius. He could already see that the boy would agree to his terms. The trust that had once been with the Hokage had now been moved to him, and he could already feel the boy's loyalty changing. With some time, he would be able to mold the boy to be the perfect servant, and then he would be able to get back to civilization and get the resources necessary to study this planet and its people. Plagueis didn't have to worry about time though, as he had all the time in the world. If needed, he could always increase the boy's lifespan with his midi-chlorian manipulation. It was possible that he could be stuck here for a long time. It all depended on the damage to the ship and making a fuel source. It would normally take years or even decades to teach the Naruto what he needed to know, but Plagueis had already been thinking about that. When he was in the boy's mind, there was a strange time difference, and perhaps he could use that to his advantage. He had to teach Naruto about language, technology, how to think properly, how to use the force, and how to fight. He would also have to remove the frivolous notions of becoming the leader of the village and remove the boy's boasting and loudness. Most of the emotions had to go as well. He would teach Naruto how to harness and wield his emotions and not let them overpower him. Naruto would also need to be taught to think like a Sith. It was obvious that Naruto's mind would need a great deal of time and effort to get him up to where Plagueis felt a servant of his should be. It just might be possible though, and Plagueis was very interested in trying. He wouldn't make the same mistakes that he did with Sidious. Until he would be able to properly study this planet, he would have to settle for training Naruto and learning all that he could from him. The ship might not be the best place to stay as the power was dwindling, and it would be difficult for Naruto to keep sneaking out of the village. The ship wasn't flat on the bottom of the lake either and was at a slight angle, which made it less ideal for most physical exercises and teaching. Also, someone was bound to get suspicious about where Naruto was always going when he went outside the village. The ship had to be kept hidden and safe, but his holocron was first priority. He missed and couldn't believe it. He actually missed most of the target. That wasn't supposed to happen, at least not to him. The 6-year-old Uchiha Sasuke stood a good distance away from one of the academy training's posts and was frowning at it. He threw all 6 of his shuriken at once like he always did, he made the same dramatic pose like he always did, and he expected to see the same results as he always had. However, 3 shuriken hadn't even hit the post, another 2 had hit, but barely, and the final shuriken hit the post but didn't embed into it. He continued to stare and frown, but it quickly turned into a glare. He ignored the cries of his fangirls as they tried to console him because he didn't completely hit the target. Despite trying to drown out the noise, he could still hear them shouting that he would get it next time. I don't miss. He thought. I'm an Uchiha and we don't miss. After all that practicing, he had done so poorly. He couldn't believe it. Was there something wrong with the shuriken? He thought. The day was sunny and there was no wind to speak of, so it couldn't have been environmental factors. It must have been something wrong with the shuriken. He convinced himself. When he threw the kunai, he might have to aim more carefully if there was something with them wrong too. Standing about 15 feet away was the group of boys in the class. They were all separated from the girls by at least 10 feet and standing quietly while they waited for their turn. Among them was Uzumaki Naruto who, if one could see his face, had the biggest shit-eating grin. He could hardly contain his own laughter at what he had done. It was just a simple manipulation of the force. Using a very basic application of force push to change the trajectory of the shuriken. He had to be subtle enough that he didn't move the weapons too much. He had used his right hand and faced it towards where Sasuke was aiming, but kept the hand at his side. All he had to do was get the timing right and concentrate on what he wanted to accomplish. The use of his hand was more to focus on the area and objects that he wanted to affect and as a conduit for the force to go through. He had to make sure that no one saw him doing something strange though, so he didn't reach out his hand to better use the technique. Naruto was wearing a dark gray jacket that was unzipped and open, which showed that he had on a black high-collared shirt that mostly covered his face. The hood of the jacket was also up and it shadowed most of his face. He had black pants on, the standard ninja footwear, and black fingerless gloves. He was glad he had the hood and high collar as the other boys might wonder why he was trying so hard not to laugh if they saw him. He actually had to bite his lip to keep breaking out in chuckles. Naruto regained his composure however. He would like to have said that he was able to overcome the urge to laugh, but the real reason was that Sasuke was preparing to throw his kunai. He needed to get ready and focused. Sasuke placed all 6 kunai between his fingers and prepared for his throw. Most other students threw one at a time, but he liked to show off. However, he didn't like to let others know that he liked to show off. He looked at the target and steadied his breathing. A moment later he threw. The kunai flew to the target as he took his famous dramatic pose. It's the pose where his head is down and arms back, sticking in air and forming a V. He waited only a moment to hear the results, which were a series of clangs and a dull thud. He nearly fell over in shock, and standing not too far away, Naruto nearly doubled over while holding his sides and trying not to laugh out loud. Sasuke looked up a moment later to see a single kunai sticking in the post, the rest were on the ground around the post. What happened? It doesn't make any sense. He thought. A few of the other boys snickered and Naruto desperately tried not to laugh out loud. Sasuke stared at the target in both anger and confusion. The Chunin instructor, Affinities Dakoku, came up to Sasuke and asked if he was feeling alright, which made Naruto nearly lose it. The Chunin then suggested that perhaps Sasuke should have tried throwing them one at a time and not all at once, to which Sasuke scowled but reached into his ninja pouch and took out another kunai. He tossed it at the target with a smirk, but it hit the ring of the only kunai embedded in the target and bounced off. Now thoroughly embarrassed, Sasuke left the throwing area and went back to the boys' lineup. I didn't do anything on that last one, thought Naruto as he tried not to laugh out loud again. He managed to get over his laughter until he saw who was coming up to throw next. It was Inuzuka Kiba. And now to add salt to the wound, Naruto thought with a devious smirk that also couldn't be seen. Kiba took his position and started throwing his shuriken one by one. To his astonishment, and everyone else's for that matter, they all hit the target post. It took Kiba a second to realize what he had done before he started shouting in triumph. Many of the girls booed him as they thought it was some type of fluke that he had beaten Sasuke. The now confident and smirking Kiba took out his kunai and managed to get each of them to hit the target as well. While the girls and Kiba shouted again, Sasuke was grinding his teeth together as he couldn't believe that someone had managed to beat him. He was in Uchiha and they were supposed to be the best. He had always felt inferior to his brother, but there was no way he was going to be inferior to anyone in this class. Maybe you should take a few pointers from Kiba, Sasuke, said a disembodied voice and the other boys laughed. Although none of them had thought of it at the time, they didn't know who had said it and no one would have recognized the voice if they were paying attention. A lot had happened since he had found that starship just over 1 year ago. Plagueis had introduced Naruto to his spirit form and after the boy awoke from screaming and fainting, he had assured Naruto that he wasn't a real ghost and had no intention of haunting him. After that was over, Naruto took Plagueis' holocron in a backpack that Naruto had found in the ship and they went around Konoha to look for a place to set up a base or training area. Any area that was in the open or near even low traffic was completely out of the question. They investigated the Hokage mountain as it contained many emergency shelters in case the village was attacked. Most of the shelters were suitable for training, but if the village were attacked, then the area would be discovered and the village could be attacked at any moment. There was no room that was secluded from the other areas in the shelters. Plagueis was looking for an area that was no longer used and not even widely known about. They managed to find only one such area inside of the village, which was the backside of the faces on the monument. Though they didn't know it, when the faces were created, the area where the face would go was hollowed out with earth jutsu to provide the materials for form the face. The faces weren't actually carved but created with earth jutsu. This left hollow areas behind the faces that few were aware of and where no one went or used. Naruto already possessed a routine of going up to the top of the Hokage monument heads and watching over the village, so few would think twice if they saw him walking up there. There were several buildings on the top of the monument, but they were set back from the edge a good distance and tree cover was around. It took a while, but they had found the entrance way into the space behind the faces. It was normally locked, but a small usage of the force from Plagueis was all it took to gain access. Plagueis had found the area to be well suited for what he had in mind. There were many rocks of different sizes strewn on the floor that could be used and the area was very flat. It was also secluded and from examining the area, he could tell that no one had come there for some time. The 4 faces of the mountain provided 4 separate rooms to put whatever they wanted in. Seeing that it would be difficult to move everything that Plagueis had wanted taken out of the ship because of the water, they went shopping. When Plagueis had been speaking to the QB, he had used a bit of his mind tricks and persuasion on it to have it divulge more information than it normally would have for an intruder in the boy's mindscape. Initially, Plagueis had tried to talk with the creature, but the QB had been very tight-lipped about answering his questions. As time went on in the mindscape and with the application of a few force abilities, the QB unknowingly revealed more and more to him. Information about the boy and his parents, information on the ceiling, and a good amount concerning chakra and ninja in general were all revealed to Plagueis. It may have been a powerful creature and filled with an incredible amount of hate, but its mind wasn't very strong-willed, nor were its mental defenses against his subtle use of the force. Plagueis was very skilled at manipulation and mind control tricks, so it wasn't very hard for him. Once he found out that the large creature was trapped, he could have tried to take more information, but was content for that moment. It would be best not to anger the creature and hamper what he had established. Some of what he had learned during that long talk was the reason that they were headed to one of the many ninja supply stores in Konoha. Naruto had been very apprehensive about entering any of the stores, but Plagueis had assured him that everything would be fine. Naruto was still wearing the backpack with the holocron in it, so Plagueis could talk with the boy through telepathy, and he had taught Naruto to not verbally reply when others were around. Eventually Naruto would be able to reply to him with his own telepathy, and they would find better accommodations than carrying his holocron around in a large backpack. Naruto had nervously entered the store, and the person at the counter had instantly recognized him. The man was about to do something when he stopped and had a dazed look on his face. Naruto had felt something, but he wasn't sure what had happened. Plagueis told him to take the opportunity and look through the aisles. The owner just stood behind the counter with a dumb smile on his face while Naruto shopped. Plagueis examined the variety of weapons that ninja used. Really, they had been here to purchase several storage scrolls, but why waste the opportunity? They picked out several sets of weapons, the storage scrolls they were originally after, and standard ninja pouches. Sets of new clothing were chosen, in colors that did not involve orange, and Plagueis told Naruto to look at the swords. Eventually, the boy would wield a lightsaber, but that was many years off. Plagueis did have an idea which they could try in a couple of years when Naruto became more advanced in the force, but for now, they looked for something normal. The store had a small selection of blades and of different quality. While Naruto was amazed at the variety, as he had never been inside of a weapons shop before, Plagueis was systematically narrowing down the choices. The katana was obviously too long for the boy, and even in years to come it still would be. The sword which bore the label Wakizashi could have been right for him, as well as the ninjato. The tantos were a little too small, and while there were several other blades, they were too unique and couldn't be used with the sword styles that Plagueis was going to teach him. After narrowing down the choices, Plagueis informed Naruto of the options, and the blonde chose the straight-bladed ninjato. They took the merchandise to the counter where the still smiling owner stood. The man totaled up to the amount, and before Naruto could ask Plagueis how they would pay for it all with the money he bought, the owner knocked off over 70% off the price. As Naruto packed up his new equipment he had asked, "How did you do that?" The Plagueis who responded, "Weak minds can be easily confused or bent to the will others. That which you saw wasn't very difficult to perform. Will you teach me that?" Naruto asked and Plagueis responded, "Yes, in time I will teach you that and more." It was mostly a lie though, as Plagueis wouldn't be teaching Naruto mind control or force subjugation, but just the regular mind tricks. Naruto smiled at the statement as he packed the rest into the backpack and sealed the sword into one of the scrolls. It wouldn't do for him to walk the streets displaying a weapon. It took a while for the confusion to wear off and the owner to stop selling things at ridiculously low prices to anyone that walked in. The next day, Naruto became a student of Plagueis, and he was to call him master from that day forward. Master Plagueis had immediately started teaching Naruto, getting him to first feel his two powers and tell the difference between the two. Naruto practiced basic manipulation of the force, and they experimented with chakra. This actually led to several discoveries. While trying to use his powers, his connection to the force and chakra were like oil and water. They always stayed separate and it wasn't possible to combine them into one power. However, when he channeled the force, he also channeled some of his chakra without knowing it, and the opposite also happened, when he channeled only chakra little of the force was channeled as well. Naruto was completely oblivious to what was going on, but Plagueis could feel it happening and was very intrigued. It proved that Naruto might be able to control them simultaneously, perhaps with very interesting results. Plagueis wasn't sure exactly how chakra could help Naruto's force powers, but he had several ideas on how the force could be used to augment jutsu. He was eager to find out in the coming years. Naruto would first need to acquire and learn jutsu, but that wasn't exactly a problem in a village full of ninja. If they couldn't get jutsu through regular means, then they would buy it, steal it, or take it from the minds of others. Plagueis had long ago learned patience from his own master, but he was having difficulty reining in his thoughts and curiosity on the matter of chakra, jutsu, and their interaction with the force. Training had resumed for Naruto after the slight digress from Plagueis' schedule, in which he taught Naruto to start feeling for and trying to use both powers at once. It was important to investigate such a discovery, but Plagueis knew he would have plenty of time for that later, and as much as he was interested, he had to control his emotions and feelings. He still had plans to set in motion and a new student to train. They had a lot of ground to cover, especially when it came to Naruto's mind. Plagueis had started having Naruto meditate while holding his holocron. Touching the holocron would allow Plagueis to have a better connection with Naruto when they entered his mindscape. With a little experimentation, Plagueis found that the difference between the boy's mind and the outside world was close to a factor of 60. 60 seconds on the inside for every 1 second that passed on the outside. It was almost equivalent to an hour of study for every minute that passed on the outside. Naruto wasn't anywhere near a genius, but Plague's thoughts on intelligence were that, unless a person had some kind of illness or mental handicap, they could learn anything. It would just take varying amounts of time from person to person and the willingness of the individual to learn. Therefore, he was sure that Naruto could learn everything that he planned to teach him. While Plagueis would not teach him all the force powers that were at his own disposal when he still had his body, he would make sure that Naruto had a powerful mind and enough abilities to get by. He would teach the boy how to protect his mind and how to think more like a Sith and then move on to force powers. The problem that the boy currently had wasn't really stupidity. It was that he was so focused on the village and becoming Hokage that he didn't care about anything else. He didn't care about reading or learning or listening. He also got bored rather easily. In truth, he didn't care about anything that wouldn't help him on his way to becoming Hokage. However, Naruto didn't actually know what things would help him be Hokage. No one had ever explained something like that to him. He'd focused on such a faraway goal that he couldn't see the steps and path to get there. The effect made it seem like the boy was at a much lower intelligence because he was oblivious to many things that happened around him and even some basic knowledge was not known to him. Not having anyone to properly teach him was another inhibitor. The boy lacked basic interactions with others and was easy to manipulate. The only focus that the boy had for training was that he had to train his body. Naruto had no plans to ever train his mind or even read a single book. He only knew that he needed to train and become stronger, but he had no idea how to train himself and how to become stronger. No one had ever explained that to him either, and if they had, he probably didn't realize that it was important and disregarded it. The strongest person wasn't the most intelligent or the one that was the most physically strong or powerful. It took a blend of intelligence, physical abilities, and power to make a person stronger than others. On an average day, Plagueis would spend around 3 hours inside of Naruto's mindscape teaching him basic knowledge. It may not have seemed that much, but 3 hours on the outside was equivalent to nearly 8 days on the inside of the boy's mind. Plagueis started teaching Naruto how to read and write in Galactic Basic Standard, as well as the basics of mathematics, science, engineering, the history of the galaxy, history of the Jedi and Sith, information about the Force, and teaching him about the starship. It was a great deal of information, but Plagueis had 8-day increments to teach Naruto these things. Plagueis was aware of how much time it would take to teach Naruto everything that a Sith acolyte should know, but with the mindscape training, he would have all the time he needed. The only thing that Plagueis valued more than his research was his own knowledge. His master had even called him Plagueis the Wise because of his vast knowledge on so many subjects. He was a firm believer that knowledge was power and was always trying to learn more about the galaxy and the Force. Therefore he had much more knowledge than most Jedi or Sith on just about any topic and was planning to teach Naruto as much as he thought the boy would need in order to further his plans. Back in the real world, Plagueis spent the remaining hours of the day working on Naruto's physical training and force training. Plagueis was teaching him a martial art style known as Terazkasi, which was basic for steel hand and was an old style that was developed by a group of people to specifically fight the Jedi. What better style for a Sith than one which was specifically created and adapted over thousands of years to fight Jedi? The style was specifically made for speed and anticipation of strikes and included teachings for the user to be able to close off their mind from mind trick or other mental-based attacks. Plagueis started Naruto on an intense training regimen for his body, but quickly found himself making revisions. He had assumed what he thought Naruto's physical aptitude and abilities would be, but was wrong in his assumption. Plagueis had worked Sidious into the ground while training his student, but Naruto had far more stamina and recovery abilities than what he was used to, and a regiment that he deemed as hard barely winded the boy. He also found that he had to keep increasing the regiment as Naruto kept growing accustomed to the current level of training. Despite the problems, Plagueis was very pleased with the discovery. In a few years, he believed that Naruto would easily be able to outlast almost any opponent that he faced in the galaxy. Using the ninjato, Plagueis had started teaching Naruto the basics of several Sith styles of lightsaber combat. The ninjato was a perfect substitute as it was a straight blade and was the perfect length for Naruto to use. Eventually, Plagueis might also teach Naruto several of the Jedi styles so he could better combat them if they ever encountered a Jedi in the future. Starting out with just basic manipulation of the Force, Naruto started showing great aptitude for telekinesis. In just a few short months, he was already pushing and pulling objects, and he could make several objects float in the air around him while meditating or doing a handstand. Naruto had very good control over the Force, but he lacked that good control over his chakra. Plagueis had also worked on stealth and trying to hide both of Naruto's signatures. It appeared that ninja weren't able to sense the fact that Naruto had any other power besides his chakra, or at least they hadn't come across a ninja that could sense it. Plagueis had decided that he wouldn't teach Naruto in the same way that he taught Sidious. Sidious was taught to hate Plagueis, and he had taken away everything that his student enjoyed, as well as making him face all his fears, while also teaching Sidious to control and harness his emotions. The same training wouldn't be done with Naruto, as Plagueis didn't want his acolyte to gain too much power and destroy him like Sidious had tried to do. Therefore, he had settled for gaining the boy's trust and loyalty, while still working on controlling and harnessing emotions and removing his fears, but to a lesser degree. Plagueis had no real attachment to the boy, but he was an interesting subject to study and teach. He wouldn't make the same mistakes that he did with Sidious. To better travel and keep an eye on his acolyte, Plagueis had Naruto get a storage seal tattooed on the skin on the underside of his right forearm. Plagueis then had Naruto seal his holocron into it when Naruto was going out of their hiding area or out of his apartment. That way, Plagueis could stay with his acolyte and observe everything that happened while still keeping in contact. Unless the skin that the seal was on was destroyed, Plagueis would remain safely inside of the seal, and Naruto wouldn't have to carry around a pyramidal shape object wherever he went. Plagueis also had Naruto get a customized bracers to wear over his arms to better protect the seal. They were made for someone who was a few years older than Naruto, but neither was planning to get into any fights in the meantime. While sealed in the storage seal, Plagueis' holocron was technically always in contact with Naruto, allowed Plagueis to access the mindscape as Naruto if holding the holocron. Plagueis could also have his spirit move inside and outside of the seal at will. Now Plagueis was far more mobile as he had Naruto to take him wherever he wanted to go. He also had the same influence outside of the seal as he did when someone was near his holocron. After a year of learning and training, Naruto found that he was already ahead of the students at the academy. He had learned 2 of the basic 3 academy jutsu, while the others in his class hadn't even started learning them yet. It seemed however that he was unable to perform the 3rd standard academy jutsu, the Bunshin no Jutsu. Plagueis believed that it was a result of Naruto not having enough control over his chakra, and the fact that the amount of chakra that Naruto had kept increasing at a much faster rate than anyone else in his class. After much work and meditation, Naruto had been able to create 1 clone, but not any more than that, and he would overload the jutsu, creating multiple flimsy clones or ones that looked dead. Plagueis planned on finding something else that the boy could use, as they learned from the academy teachings that there were multiple clone jutsus that were more advanced. Plagueis had been very interested in the substitution jutsu as well as the transformation jutsu. The force had similar techniques to the henge, but they weren't nearly as easy and simple to use as the chakra-based technique. The substitution jutsu, however, was far more interesting to Plagueis, as apparently it could allow someone to change places with a nearby object and escape death, or even change places with another person. Such a technique would be incredibly useful to have, and he wished something similar could be done with the force. That such techniques were considered to be at the lowest level when they could be so useful and easy to use was rather fascinating to Plagueis. The similarities were also interesting, as 2 of the basic academy jutsu had mirroring techniques with force users. He was now even more interested to further his knowledge of ninjutsu and perhaps discover what other similarities there were. Plagueis still wasn't even sure how chakra was produced or affected the body, as the explanation given during the academy had been rather basic and didn't explain anything that was actually taking place inside of the body. Besides those findings, the academy had become rather boring unless the Chunin teacher was lecturing about new topics that didn't involve history. Naruto had already read through all of the academy materials that the students were provided, and on his master's order, had even broken into the academy to find other information and materials to learn from. He didn't end up finding very much though, but learned it all anyway. The visit to the Konoha library didn't turn up anything of interest, as the village apparently separated the civilian and shinobi materials. After some investigation, they had found out where the ninja library was. Interestingly enough, it was in the Hokage mountain and not far from their hideout. Naruto ventured up the long staircase to the archives but was stopped by a guard at the entrance. Apparently you needed to have clearance from the Hokage or the required ninja rank to get in. Plagueis hadn't tried to gain access by using any mintricks on the guard because he could feel if other people were inside and wasn't sure if he could trick all of them before someone noticed and wondered what was going on. It was too risky at the moment. The only other places that he might be able to get jutsu were from the ninja clans or the Hokage, but Plagueis wasn't about to have Naruto go trespassing and stealing jutsu from them. Naruto had already asked as many questions as he could during class time in the academy. The instructor eventually had told him that he couldn't ask any more questions, especially ones that were so far ahead of the class lessons. Most of the questions were ones that Plagueis wanted answered, but the information that the instructor was currently teaching was so far behind what Plagueis really wanted to know that the instructor wouldn't interrupt the lesson to answer the advanced questions. For the most part, Naruto was completely ignored by the Chunin teacher in favor of another student who the teacher was positive were more gifted. That student had yet to really show much potential that would garner such a declaration, and Plagueis believed it was just because of the clan that boy was from. In fact, Naruto was actually at the top of the class, but was purposely being ignored by the instructor in favor of Uchiha Sasuke. While Plagueis would admit that the Uchiha was talented, the boy had a penchant for showing off and wasn't doing as well as Naruto in all of the academy subjects. The academy situation was a problem because that meant that they would have to wait for several years in order to gain more knowledge and instruction on chakra and jutsu. While Plagueis was patient, Naruto had already exhausted all of the knowledge that the academy was willing to provide to someone at his level. In the future, Naruto would be able to either break into the places that had the information they wanted or gain access to them through rank. Since Naruto was already learning at a very accelerated rate, it wouldn't be long before he completely outstripped his classmates and students ahead of his grade level as well. Plagueis had thought that Naruto would be noticed as an outstanding student and arrangements would be made to have him moved into a higher grade to not hold him back. Apparently he was wrong, as the Chunin instructor was a rather weak-minded fool that held the Uchiha clan in very high regard. Instead of waiting patiently, Plagueis decided to act. Naruto sat in his regular seat at the academy. The room was empty as class had ended several minutes ago. Standing across from Naruto was his Chunin instructor Funeno Dakoku, and he wasn't looking very happy. Naruto had purposely gotten into trouble by creating a disruption during class and had insulted Uchiha Sasuke. He knew exactly what buttons to press to antagonize Sasuke, as well as Dakoku, and nearly started a fight between himself and Sasuke. Dakoku broke up the fight and told Naruto that he had to wait after class so he could speak to him about his detention. Dakoku walked up to the desk that Naruto was sitting behind, and before he could go on a tirade about how terrible it was that Naruto had insulted the noble Uchiha clan, Plagueis struck. Plagueis' spirit form came up from the floor behind Dakoku, and before the Chunin even knew that something was wrong, Plagueis' hand extended forward and grasped the Chunin's head. Any words that the instructor had to say were stopped and his eyes became unfocused. Naruto wasn't exactly sure what his master was doing to the Chunin, but he really didn't care. Minutes elapsed until the man's eyes became focused again. Plagueis took the short moment of confusion and disorientation that the Chunin experienced to sink back into the floor. Dakoku looked around and noticed Naruto. He smiled and said with a cheery voice, "That will be all, and don't let it happen again, young man." The man then walked out of the room and headed down the hallway. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the Chunin's actions and said in his mind, "What did you do to him, master?" Plagueis' voice came back clearly in Naruto's head, "I just made a few arrangements. Now come, let us go back to your house and wait to be summoned." Naruto was confused, and Plagueis sensed his confusion but did not elaborate, and Naruto knew not to question his master, as all would be revealed in time. He packed up his materials and left for his apartment. Naruto didn't know who would summon him, as the only person that would do something like that was the Hokage. Was that where Dakoku went? He wondered. Hokage Tower, 20 minutes later. Dakoku had headed straight for the Hokage Tower after leaving the academy. He knew exactly what the problem with Naruto was and exactly how to solve it. Stopping at the Hokage's secretary, he managed to get an appointment to see the Hokage and only had to wait 10 or so minutes. The secretary informed him that the Hokage was now free and he walked up to the double doors and knocked. "Enter," came a voice inside, and Dakoku stepped inside the office. He greeted the Hokage and sat down in a chair in front of the old wooden desk. The Sandaime was rather curious about why the teacher had visited him. He hoped it wasn't about Naruto, as he was already busy enough and didn't need any more of the boy's pranks. Although, now that he thought about it, he hadn't heard about Naruto pranking anyone for a while. "What exactly did you need to see me about, Hineno-san?" asked the Hokage while he smoked his pipe. He didn't mind a break from his paperwork and only hoped it was good news. "Hokage-sama, I came here to talk to you about one of my students. Uzumaki Naruto," stated Dakoku seriously. The Sandaime repressed a frown and a heavy sigh. "I knew it." He though and wondered just what Naruto had gotten himself into. "And what exactly has Naruto-kun done this time?" asked the Hokage and blew out some smoke away from the Chunin in front of him. "Lately he has been acting out in class, and I believe I know the reason for it," stated Dakoku, and the Sandaime raised an eyebrow. He knew exactly why Naruto always acted out but was curious as to why Dakoku would bring it up. I believe that Uzumaki-san is not suited for my class, stated Dakoku, and the Hokage had to suppress a groan as he had thought that he picked a teacher that wouldn't be discriminating against Naruto, but before he could say anything, the Chunin continued, I think he needs to be moved up a grade. Finished the Chunin. To say that the Sandaime was surprised was an understatement. His pipe nearly fell out of his mouth. Several thoughts went through his head as he studied the instructor before him. Is he trying to get Naruto out of his class by moving him forward in grade because he knows that I won't let Naruto be kicked out the academy? Does he plan on putting Naruto into a grade that he isn't ready for to discourage the boy from being a ninja? The Hokage asked, I suppose you have good reasoning for this change. It's highly unusual to have students graduate early or move up in grade during peacetime. Yes, I understand, but I believe that the boy is more advanced than the other children in his grade. He really doesn't seem to care much about the lessons. I've also noticed him acting out and distracting the other students, possibly because he's bored, said Dakoku. The Sandaime just looked at the man in front of him strangely and wondered if it was a good idea to have him teaching at the academy. Naruto, more advanced than the other students? He questioned as it really wasn't something that he had ever considered. Most of the other students came from clans and were actually heirs or heiresses to those clans, which meant they had training as well as better education than most. The Sandaime never would have expected a teacher to come and tell him something like that about Naruto. He had always known Naruto to be rather slow and having a very short attention span. It made him wonder about the teacher and why he would think such a thing. Naruto had always acted out and tried to get attention, and his limited attention span was obviously causing him to get bored in class, but to be bored because he was more advanced than the other students. Before the Sandaime could say anything, Dakoku continued, he has also started asking very advanced questions during class, which are well ahead of what I am currently teaching. I actually had to stop him from asking questions because I just wouldn't be able to stick to my lesson plan if I answered all of them. As of this moment, Uzumaki-san is the top student in the class and his grades speak for themselves, said Dakoku, and he handed his grading sheets to the Hokage for him to look over. The Sandaime sifted through the grading sheets for this year and he noticed that Naruto had scored at the top of the class in nearly every subject. The Sandaime wasn't able to keep the surprise off his face. Naruto's grades weren't perfect, but they were close and better than the rest of the class, which was saying something as it had so many sons and daughters of clan heads. Is he really that much more advanced? He thought, and he remembered that Dakoku had taught Uchiha Itachi while the boy was briefly in the academy, so it was possible that the man knew what he was talking about when it came to a gifted student. Naruto wasn't anywhere near as gifted as Itachi, but he was definitely ahead of the class if the Chunin before him and the documents were anything to go by. A student that wasn't learning anything because they already knew the information might act out, get bored, and even distract other students, that was certainly true. The Hokage thought over what had been presented to him. From what he was seeing, it appeared that Naruto was far more gifted than he had originally thought. He thought perhaps that the files had been doctored and that the Chunin had it out for Naruto, but that didn't seem to be the case, as the instructor seemed genuinely interested in Naruto's development. The Sandaime also didn't want to hold Naruto back if he was excelling in his lessons and surpassing all of the children of the ninja clan heads in Konoha. It was peacetime in the village, but that didn't mean that he couldn't skip Naruto ahead a grade. It required the recommendation from the teacher, the Hokage's own approval, and the agreement of the child or guardian of the child. It was unusual, but if Naruto was willing to get advanced to the next grade before the other students in his class, then he would agree. Naruto could always be put back in the same class if things didn't work out. The Hokage considered Dakoku's recommendation, but he would need to talk with Naruto first, so he sent one of his Anbu to get Naruto. It appeared as though his master's plan was in motion as Naruto made his way to the Hokage tower. He wasn't sure what exactly was going on yet, but he was slowly piecing it together from what he knew. This could be some kind of test from his master, and he intended to figure out as much of it as possible before everything was revealed. Plagueis wasn't forthcoming at all with any details concerning what he had done to the Chunin instructor and what was currently going to happen. It was a lesson and he was trying to teach Naruto to make conclusions off the details provided and by using the force. So far Naruto knew the plan involved the academy teacher and the Sandaime. Naruto's first thought was that his master would get the teacher replaced with one who would answer all of his questions. This theory didn't seem correct though, as there could have been numerous ways to get the teacher fired and they didn't involve needing to speak to the Hokage. Naruto hadn't had much interaction with the Hokage since he had met his master. He had met with the Hokage to discuss his entrance to the academy, but only a handful of times after that. Plagueis had instructed Naruto on the best choice of words to talk to the Hokage and Naruto had put up the best mask that he could. It wasn't wise for the Hokage of the village to see a change in Naruto's personality or notice anything strange. The Sunday Ami also didn't have much time to talk with Naruto as he had been rather busy with village business, especially with the Uchiha clan. Unknowingly, this had worked in Plague's favor as it gave him valuable time to bring Naruto over to his side. Naruto entered the office and sat in one of the chairs in front of the desk. The Sunday Ami hadn't seen Naruto for a while and was curious about his change in clothing. Dakoku had informed him that Naruto had become more serious during the months that he had been an academy student. It wasn't until he got bored that he started goofing off and distracting the rest of the class. The clothing certainly made Naruto appear as a ninja and much more professional, despite that he was a first-year academy student. The Sunday Ami was curious as to what brought up this change, but perhaps the realization of being a ninja had set in a little early for him. Most academy students don't realize what they were getting into until after they graduate. They still had whimsical notions of what ninja are and think the profession is full of adventure. The reality was that they were child soldiers and the profession would be dangerous and difficult no matter how long they had been doing it. Few students ever grasped this until after they were put through the Chunin exams or went on a mission that was more dangerous than it was ranked. Many never grasped it as they dropped out or failed to graduate and were never really aware of how their belief differed from reality. The boy sitting before the Sunday Ami was very different from the boy that he remembered the previous year. Something must have changed. The Sunday Ami thought as he tried to think of what it could have been. He hadn't seen much of Naruto since before he had joined the academy. The only thing that he knew which happened was when he left the village and nearly drowned in a nearby lake. It definitely could have been a life-changing experience. The Sunday Ami originally thought that Naruto was fine as he hadn't developed a fear of water and was even eager to learn to swim and get over that experience. Perhaps it did affect him but in a different way. He could be taking his life more seriously now that he has had a near-death experience, thought the Sunday Ami. As to why Naruto was wearing darker clothing and mostly covering his face, the Sunday Ami didn't quite know. "Well, you've certainly altered your wardrobe," said the Sunday Ami as he broke the brief silence. "Isn't this what a ninja is supposed to look like?" responded Naruto, and the Sunday Ami chuckled slightly. He was thinking that Naruto had probably taken the looks that other ninja had and put them all together. The high-collar shirt was reminiscent of the Uchiha clan, while the jacket from the Aburami clan. He couldn't peg down the rest to a specific clan or ninja, but it was definitely a ninja look that the boy achieved. "I had an interesting conversation with you teacher, Hineno-san, just an hour ago or so. Do you know what he wanted to talk about?" asked the Sunday Ami as he was curious whether Naruto might know something or if Dakoku had told him anything. "I'm not in trouble, am I?" asked Naruto with a slight bit of curiosity. The Sunday Ami gave a small smile and replied, "No, you aren't in trouble. He came to tell me that you are at the top of your class and excelling at nearly all your subjects. He had nothing but good things to say about you. During class he only ever has good things to say about Sasuke." Naruto blurted out and he could feel a mental nudge from his master as that had not been a very good thing to say. Plagueis wasn't going to actually talk to him as that might divert Naruto's attention. The last thing they wanted was for the Hokage to think that Naruto was hearing voices. The Sunday Ami nodded at the response from Naruto and thought about why that was. It could be that he doesn't want to alienate himself by supporting Naruto. It does seem strange that he would favor one student and not the student that deserved it, thought the Sunday Ami, and he picked back up the grading sheet. Uchiha Sasuke wasn't first in the class or even second when considering overall scores. He was actually in third place with Aburami Shino and Yamanaka Ino tied for second place. The coveted Rookie of the Year title was given to the top student in the class, but it was weighted more heavily with practical ninja subjects, counting more than the theoretical. Considering the weighting factor, Naruto was still first place with Sasuke and Ino tied for second and Shino in third place. Naruto definitely had a small gap between himself and the other top students in the class. Looking back to Naruto, he noted that the boy was more patient than he had known him to be, but still wasn't able to sit still in the seat. "How are you doing in the academy? What I mean to say is, do you find the subjects and material rather easy?" asked the Sunday Ami seriously. Naruto thought about what was said for a second and started figuring out why he was really there. Plagueis stayed silent as he waited for Naruto to put everything together. "Well, it's kinda boring. I've already gone over all of the material for the rest of the year and I've tried to ask questions about more advanced stuff but the teacher wouldn't answer them anymore. I tried to find some more information at the library but they didn't have anything and I couldn't get into the ninja library," said Naruto absent-mindedly. The Sunday Ami thought about this and was surprised that Naruto had tried to find more information about being a ninja. He didn't think that the boy had ever set foot in the library, but apparently he was wrong. Thinking it over, the Sunday Ami concluded from both the teacher and the student that Naruto was more advanced than the other students in the class. It didn't seem right to hold him back if he wasn't learning anything as he didn't want Naruto to get discouraged at a young age. I know you've only been in the academy for a couple of months, but how would you feel about skipping ahead a grade? You would be given all the materials, but would have to catch up to the rest of the class because they would be ahead of you. What do you think, would you like to skip ahead? The Sandaime asked. Naruto just smiled behind his collar. It seemed that this year was going to be more interesting than he had originally thought. Plage smiled inside of his seal on Naruto's arm. His mind control on the weak-minded Chunin had worked. He might have to do the same thing in the coming years to get Naruto out of the academy faster, but they would work on that when the time came. From the information that they had gathered, the ninja library was only open to ninja Chunin rank or higher, and even at that rank, a Chunin could only look at so much in the library. Even if Naruto skipped ahead a few grades, they would still have trouble getting what they wanted. Another option could come along, but Plagueis wasn't willing to wait for something that may never happen. The best way to start getting and learning about jutsu was to get Naruto out of the academy. The missions that ninja went on could provide many opportunities to gather more information and techniques, especially since they would be outside of the village and away from the majority of prying eyes. From what they had found out during lectures at the academy, ninja typically worked in a 4-man group with one ninja that was the leader and higher in rank than the others. This wasn't always true for other missions, but it was the standard for genin squads. This meant that instead of an entire village, they would only have to worry about a few pairs of eyes. Plagueis was also thinking about other methods for Naruto to gain more knowledge and also fighting experience. He had come across one, but it would be several years before he could be sure that Naruto would survive. He also had plans for Naruto to create a personal weapon of his own. The ninjato wasn't a bad weapon, but it could only take so much damage in fighting before it wore out. There was also the problem of finding fuel or a new power source for the ship and making sure it wasn't damaged. Not to mention that it was still at the bottom of a lake. These plans were all in the future though. For now, they wouldn't attract too much attention and learn what they could from the academy, while Plagueis continued to train Naruto's mind and body. Sitting in a tree and spying through a set of third-floor windows was an 8-year-old Naruto. He could see that the first exam was just about to end. The genin that didn't make the exam were filing out of the academy as they wouldn't be able to proceed to the next stage of the Chunin exams. Naruto was gathering information because his master wanted him to infiltrate into the second stage of the Chunin exams. He was wearing a larger coat than he wore 2 years prior, but, other than that, had on the same clothing style as before. The second stage of the Chunin exams was a battle between teams in Training Ground 44, which was also known as the Forest of Death. Plagueis wanted Naruto to sneak into the exams in order to obtain a scroll from one of the genin teams that was trying to pass. Each team was given single scroll of a set and they needed to get one of each scrolls to pass the exam. They had 5 days in the forest to do this and they couldn't open the scrolls. Naruto knew that his master was testing him to determine through a real-life situation where Naruto's skills were at. The test was also a chance to gain valuable information and fighting experience. Although the participants in the exams were all genin, they still had many different jutsu and techniques that could be useful. His master had recently taught him a force ability that could be used to take knowledge from another person. All Naruto would have to do was find a genin squad that might have jutsu and defeat them. If he killed them, he wouldn't be able to gain much knowledge from them, so he had to knock them out and keep them alive. He planned to use stealth and cunning overpower to defeat 3 genin. That was the reason why Naruto was spying on the participants. He wanted to determine which ones would be a good target and might have jutsu that he could use, as well as get an idea of weaknesses. It never hurt to gain as much information as possible. Master Plagueis was still back at the hideout as this was something that Naruto would accomplish on his own. Naruto would take his master's holocron with him into the forest by placing it in the seal on his arm, but Plagueis would only intervene if his student was about to die. Naruto's attention was diverted from the genin when a flying ball of cloth smashed into the academy windows. Naruto blinked as he stared through his goggles and wondered what was going on until a woman was revealed and the cloth turned out to be a large sign. He stopped himself from sweat dropping at the sight and pushed his goggles up to rest on his forehead. There was no other information that he could gather as the exam was over. Naruto was actually quite a good distance away from the academy and was using a pair of goggles that he himself had created. They were an interesting piece of technology that he had crafted from a very large pair of electrobinoculars that were in the spaceship. He had taken the binoculars apart to find out how they worked and then combined the technology with a pair of smaller and lighter goggles to make something that was better than both. They were light and easy to use while being just as good as the electrobinoculars with the same vision and magnification power. With a little modification to the power source, he had made them powered by a chakra battery, which were commonly sold in ninja villages and converted chakra from the user into electricity. He had found the original electrobinoculars far too heavy and bulky for his use, so he created his own pair using all of the knowledge and teachings that he had learned from Master Plagueis. Naruto had asked his master why the binoculars were so heavy and large if the technology of the galaxy was so advanced. Plagueis responded that they were large because they had to accommodate numerous species, and if they made them too small, then the company wouldn't be able to sell them to so many customers. As for the weight, he explained that they were incredibly durable and that people didn't buy something unless it was a little heavy, as it could be a knockoff brand or just rather cheap. Naruto had accepted the explanation, but still thought it was odd. Technology was supposed to get smaller and lighter, not the other way around. He was very satisfied with his new goggles though. He was just about to leave his spot in the trees and prepare for tonight when he both felt something and saw something out of the corner of his eye. It was a Konoha genin sitting against a fence a little ways away from the academy. He was talking with a jonin, possibly his sensei, and had probably just failed the exam. The boy looked rather down, and Naruto really didn't care, but something the jonin said had gotten quite a rise out of the genin. Naruto could feel the boy's emotions through the force. He felt elation, surprise, and hope. Now curious, Naruto pulled his goggles back down and focused on the scene. The goggles didn't have any kind of function to tell what they were saying, and Naruto couldn't read lips, but in this case he didn't have to. Using the force he was able to concentrate on the area that he wanted and hear the conversation as it wasn't that far away. The normal ninja wouldn't have been able to hear what they were saying, but Naruto was far from normal. He listened closely as the jonin told the genin about an alternate method for passing the chunin exams. It involved stealing an object and scroll from the Hokage tower. Naruto was now very interested in this conversation as he could tell that the jonin was lying and manipulating his own student. Not only did the student believe him, but he was ready to steal those objects from the Hokage to prove himself. How pathetic. Naruto thought, and he couldn't believe someone could fall for that simple trick. Naruto was supposed to go back to his apartment to prepare and then stop at the hideout and take his master's holocron with him. However, this new information was too good to pass up and he made a change in plans. Instead of heading for his apartment, he headed straight for the hideout and did his best to make sure that no one was following him. Since his student left to gather information for his test that night, Plagueis had been in deep contemplation. His thoughts ranged from his current situation, his student, and the future. Unfortunately, his current situation hadn't changed very much in the past 3 years. He was out of the starship though and learning all that he could about ninja and the mysterious energy known as chakra. By sending Naruto into the Forest of Death to retrieve a scroll from a genin team, Plagueis planned to see just what kind of level that his student was at. It was difficult to tell as he, without a body, was unable to test his student himself. It could be incredibly dangerous since Naruto would have to go after a squad of genin and not individuals. That was one of the reasons why Plagueis would go with him. He would be there to protect his investment, but not to give any advice to his student. Naruto would have to come up with a plan because they both knew that he might not be able to face 3 genin at once, especially if their teamwork was good. In the past 2 years, Naruto had continued to grow at an impressive rate. Sidious had been a prodigy, and Plagueis had trained him to the fullest, but Naruto was absorbing everything that he taught and progressing through sheer willpower and hard work. Plagueis still held back on his training of Naruto though as he didn't want to violate the rule of 2, but his curiosity kept getting the better of him and he found himself teaching Naruto a little bit more than he should have. During his 7-year isolation on the ship while under the lake, Plagueis had ample time for introspection. He examined why he had died and the events that probably lead to it. What he found was that during his time as a Sith Lord, he had moved away from the main goal of the Sith, which was galactic conquest. He had also stopped monitoring his apprentice, and that led to giving Sidious more than enough time to plot against him. Plagueis had focused more on his research and knowledge than the proper goals of a Sith Lord. He had strayed from the teachings of the rule of 2, and through the historic method of ascension, Sidious had taken his place. Plagueis still felt angry about how it had happened and had plotted revenge for a time. He thought he had put those feelings behind him, but as he saw his current student progressing and realized the potential the boy could have, he found himself thinking about getting revenge on his former apprentice and using Naruto to do it. His body was, for the most part, destroyed. Sidious had used force lighting on his corpse for a prolonged period and probably destroyed any hope of recovering any usable DNA. Cloning was difficult as it was outlawed in the Republic and required great knowledge in order to successfully make a clone. It was also very difficult to create a clone of a Force-sensitive person as it could result in mental instability, but Plagueis wasn't worried about that since he only sought to create an empty clone or just a body for his spirit to inhabit. He knew that without any usable DNA, he wouldn't be able to create his original body and may have to use some other body. That brought its own problems as a different body might not be able to contain his spirit as well as his original body would. The body could break down over time and he would be forced to transfer into a new body over and over again. Possession was out of the question in the long run, as that had an even shorter time span than using a different clone body than his original. Cloning was the best prospect for what he was thinking about. It was problematic but still better than his current position. It would take a while to gather the needed resources and technology, but it could be possible. They would first have to get off this planet and back into the galaxy in order to make any such plans fruitful. As Naruto became more knowledgeable from his teachings, they were able to go back to the ship and work on diagnosing the possible problems that the ship had and looking into the fuel problem. From what Naruto could tell from the ship's computer and his own inspection, the bottom of the hull had several micro cracks from impact and would need to be fixed. The ship could still fly and travel without the fixes. However, there existed the possibility that the forces exerted on the ship from acceleration and space atmospheric travel could cause those fractures to expand and propagate, which could lead to catastrophic failure of the hull. It wasn't something that Plagueis was willing to risk. In order to fix the micro-cracking, the ship would need to be removed from the lake and repair work performed on the underneath of the ship. They would need some place to keep the ship until that time, and they would need to move the ship away from the ninja village without anyone noticing. It was a difficult task, not impossible, but difficult. They would need to move a 30-meter-long ship that didn't have any fuel out of a lake, while less than half a mile away was a ninja village, as well as patrols in the area. As of yet, Plagueis wasn't completely sure how to do it. The fuel that the ship used was not something exotic like hypermatter. The ship was actually powered by a chemical reaction that produced enough energy in the reaction chamber to power the ship. The reaction required the mixing of two complex chemicals that formed a very energetic reaction in the reactor chamber of the ship. One chemical was already present in the reactor, and the other was fed to the reactor in a steady amount to propagate the reaction. The chemicals were rather complex, but it was possible that the planet had the required resources and technology to properly create them. Plagueis wasn't exactly sure what the chemicals were called, but the ship's computer contained the chemical composition for each, so they would just need to recreate those chemicals. The raw resources would have to be found, which might not be that hard, but they would have to experiment with combining those chemicals to find the correct ratio and formula. Then, larger amounts of the chemicals would have to be manufactured. So they would need a lab as well as a place to create the chemicals. That was also difficult but not impossible. At the moment, Plagueis was still at a loss concerning how they would go about fixing these problems, but he had a feeling that if they waited, opportunities would come. In the meantime, he would continue to train Naruto and increase the blonde's knowledge so that they would be able to act at a moment's notice when an opportunity did show up. Naruto had actually been far more interested in the teachings that Sidious disliked. Sidious hated to learn about droids or any kind of machine and wasn't interested in any devices besides his lightsaber. Naruto liked to tinker with just about anything he could get his hands on. Plagueis had to keep him away from the medical droid and the ship, otherwise Naruto would have already taken the droid apart or tried to examine sensitive systems of the ship. Sidious also didn't care much about history, whether it was the history of the Sith or just the galaxy in general. If Sidious didn't see any value in it and for his future plans, then it didn't concern him. Only the holocrons and Sith texts that Plagueis had collected and inherited were of interest to Sidious, and only for the power that they could provide. Naruto, however, was incredibly interested in the every bit of history that Plagueis was willing to share with him. He spent hours inside of his mindscape listening to his master talk about the galaxy. It didn't really matter what it was that Plagueis talked about because Naruto enjoyed listening to all of it. The blonde did have a certain fondness of information concerning Darth Revan, as well as the GD Revan. They were the same being but two different people with completely different goals and thoughts. Revan was once a GD but fell to the dark side and after losing his memory, came back to the light side of the Force. Naruto cared nothing for his own history that was taught at the academy, only the history about the galaxy that his master taught him. Naruto was also interested in the ancient civilizations such as the Rakutans and the Kree. Plagueis knew more about Rakutans than most other people in the galaxy. The Republic had erased all knowledge of the ancient civilization that had once ruled most of the galaxy. The Rakutans were a Force-sensitive species of amphibian humanoids that developed Force-powered technologies to explore the galaxy. It was even possible that they created the hyperdrive technology that was still used thousands of years later. They used this technology to conquer and enslave parts of the galaxy. The Rakutans weren't able to visit anywhere they wanted, as the unique Force-powered technology could only visit planets that were strong in the Force. Little was known about the exact reasons for the species' extinction or near extinction. At some point, they were apparently no longer able to use the Force and lost all the planets they had conquered. By the time Lord Bane, the founder of the current Sith line, had visited their home planet 1000 years ago, the species was gone. Naruto found it very interesting that the Rakutan hyperdrive was later modified and used by humans to explore the universe. They used a different power source for the device and were able to go just about anywhere in their starships. He also learned how people of different species had slowly populated most of the galaxy. It was likely that one of those ships had made it to his own planet and somehow ninja and chakra came about, though neither Plagueis or Naruto had any idea how that had happened. The Gree were another ancient civilization, only they were still around but had lost most of their technology. They were a race of grey cephalopods with 6 tentacle-like arms. Gree technology was created as a piece of art as much as a piece of technology, and it took great practice and training to use most of their incredibly technology. Unfortunately, over the many millennium that they existed, the people who had this knowledge failed to pass it on to the next generation, and they eventually had no idea how to use most of their amazing technology. No one else could use it either, and despite trying to use it, they never were able to rediscover how to operate them. Naruto found just about everything that his master told him about the galaxy fascinating, and he couldn't wait to one day see it firsthand. Besides training Naruto's mind, Plagueis had also guided Naruto's force training, physical training, swordsmanship, and working with chakra. While inside several of the Chunin teachers' minds, Plagueis had gotten a hold of different methods to train Naruto's chakra control, and had the blonde work on all of them. Naruto had yet to gain many powerful jutsu, and only had the Academy 3, as well as the few other E-rank and D-rank jutsu that were available at the Academy. Naruto had learned all of them and was desperate for some elemental jutsu. He had only spent a cumulative 3 years in the academy, but had been skipped ahead a grade 3 separate times. During one school year he had been skipped ahead twice. He was already in his 5th year of study and only had a single year left before he graduated. Unfortunately, what he learned at the academy really wasn't enough to satisfy either master or student. Both wanted to learn much more about jutsu, but didn't have a very good way to gain this knowledge. They would have to wait another year before Naruto could leave the academy. In the meantime, Plagueis had started teaching Naruto the basics of Sith alchemy. Sith alchemy was an ancient practice that involved numerous different methods of augmenting or creating objects and altering living beings. Applications for Sith alchemy could be strengthening and augmenting weapons and armor, genetically enhancing different species and making it easier to control them, or even creating objects and potions with unique functions, such as the amulet that Naruto had encountered years before. This practice was far older than the beginnings of the modern Sith Order and dated back to the original Sith species thousands of years in the past. Over that time, it had been perfected to be an incredible science that was useful to those that were able to wield it. Alchemy required more knowledge than force ability, so it was something that Naruto could definitely learn in time. Plagueis doubted that Naruto would ever be able to use the more biological aspects of Sith alchemy, but he believed that Naruto might benefit from learning about how to create objects or augment weapons and armor. One of the plans that Plagueis had was to have Naruto create a weapon for himself using Sith alchemy. Unfortunately, the exact methods to create ancient Sith swords had been lost over time, especially after both Sith and Jedi had switched to lightsabers. While the forging methods had been lost, the augmentation information had not. The scrolls and books that had been taken from Plagueis' quarters by the gun runners were all on the topics of Sith alchemy and its uses. The midi-chlorian manipulation that Plagueis had been working on before his death was also connected to Sith alchemy. Plagueis had also been studying several amulets in his spare time in order to perhaps create his own. Sith amulets had many different powers that they could be imbued with. Some were for healing, protection, understanding languages, and helping to channel the dark side. Plagueis had searched for several examples and found 3. He hadn't actually touched 2 of them because he could tell that they had been cursed in some manner using Sith magic, which was a very different practice altogether. The 3rd necklace that Plagueis had, which was not opened by the gun runner and remained in its sealed box, was for understanding the ancient Sith language. Plagueis had found it decades before, and it had helped him understand everything that was written in the scrolls until he eventually taught himself how to read and write in ancient Sith. Plagueis had already started teaching Naruto how to read, talk, and write in the ancient Sith language. Over the course of his life, Plagueis had become a master of many aspects of Sith alchemy, and with his knowledge, he planned to teach Naruto what he would need to know to augment a weapon with alchemy. Normally it would have been a problem, since the method of forging a Sith sword had been lost, but that was where the second holocron came into play. The second holocron that Plagueis had with him was actually an ancient Jedi holocron. He had found it and kept it while trying to access its information. Most of it was still not accessible to him because he was not aligned with the light side of the Force, but he was able to access information about creating a Jedi sword. Before the Jedi used lightsabers, they actually forged swords using metal, a furnace, and the Force. They had the same connection to those blades as they did lightsabers, and the blades were similar to those made by the Sith. Eventually both sides stopped using swords in favor of lightsabers, but Plagueis always had a fascination with the archaic and at one point had wanted to make a Sith sword or at least something similar to it. That was why he held onto the GD holocron, despite it not providing any other useful information to him since. He would have Naruto use the GD forging methods and the augmentation properties of Sith alchemy to create his own weapon. Most swords created using the methods of the GD were nearly indestructible and could even block a lightsaber. It would definitely be a good weapon for Naruto to have, at least until he had the materials to create a lightsaber. Plagueis had spent several months going over all the information that Naruto would need to know in order to create his own sword, and it wouldn't be very long until he would be able to try and create one. The village had many furnaces that could be used, and Naruto didn't require that much knowledge of forging a weapon, as he would use the force to guide him. They had been debating about what metals to make the blade out of, and even what extra features, if any, that the blade should have. Naruto had wanted to take apart one of the vibro blades that was on the ship and use the vibration technology to make his sword sharper and perhaps make it powered with chakra. Plagueis had suggested some metal off the ship, as well as the chakra metal that ninja used in some of their weapons. It would cost quite a bit of money, so Naruto had been saving up to buy the metal and buy the use of the furnace. It was better than using mind tricks, as people would ask where Naruto got the sword from, but he could just answer that he had made it himself. They might ask how, but no one could force him to answer. The technique to create the weapon could be considered as something that Naruto invented himself, and that would mean that he was protected from answering questions about it because it was similar to jutsu creation. If someone created a new technique, then they were under no obligation to tell anyone about it and were protected as if they had a patent on the technique. It was at that point in his thought process that he felt his student approaching their hideout. Naruto entered the hideout and knelt on one leg before his master's holocron, which was sitting on top of a pedestal made from the stone in the hideout. "Master, during my spying on the exam participants, I came across something and thought I should tell you," spoke Naruto with his head down slightly. Plagueis' spirit form appeared above the holocron. "Tell me," stated Plagueis, as he was rather interested in what this development could be. Naruto didn't go against his orders unless he felt it was important. Naruto lifted his head and looked at his master's projection. "During my spying, I came across a jonin that was consoling his genin student on his failure to pass the exams. He spoke to his student about an alternate method to pass, which involved stealing several items from the Hokage tower. One of which was a sword and the other a scroll. The jonin mentioned that the sword belonged to the Nidaime, and I think it could be the Raijin. Nothing was mentioned about the scroll or what it contained. Everything he spoke about the test was a lie, but the other information he gave, about the items and their location, seemed truthful," stated Naruto, and he could feel a small amount of surprise and interest coming from his master's spirit. Plagueis' thoughts were already moving through possible scenarios to get the sword. Ever since he had heard the sword's existence from one of the lectures at the academy, he had been interested in it. It wasn't every day that a sword with a blade made from pure electrical energy was mentioned on such a low-technology planet. Plagueis was instantly curious about it and had Naruto ask several questions about the blade during class. Unfortunately, it seemed that most ninja only knew basic information about the blade and nothing specific. They knew about the electrical energy and who had used the blade in the past, but really nothing more. It was also known that the blade was somewhere in the Hokage tower, but that was it. Naruto had heard not only the location of the blade, but a plot by a ninja of the village to use his own student to steal it for him. The scroll that came with it could be important as well, but it could also be something that wouldn't be important to them. The problem was to what to do about the information that Naruto had brought. Plagueis obviously wanted the blade, but they would need to get it in a way that didn't implicate them in any way and made others take the fall. They would need to hide all involvement in the theft, which could be difficult as ninja could track scent as well as chakra. They knew exactly what time that the boy would be stealing the Raijin and scroll. Naruto could wait until after the theft and then intercept the thief. He could also wait until later on and intercept the thief and his sensei together, or he could do something completely different. There was also an opportunity with the Jonin sensei, as he should know many different ninja techniques, as well as have at least one or two nature affinities and have worked on the training for those affinities. If Naruto could incapacitate the Jonin, then they could gain valuable information from someone that was a traitor and was expendable. Plagueis did find it odd that a genin would be able to get into what should be a very secure facility, but the directions had been simple enough and the Jonin had provided his student with a patrol schedule and where the traps were located. The only thing left to do was to decide on a course of action. Naruto arrived an hour before the genin was supposed to get through the ninja patrols and take the two items. Naruto planned to get to them before the genin could. He didn't know if the genin would be able to get the items, and if he couldn't, then they would be placed under better security, so it was best to use the information provided by the Jonin to get there first and make sure he was able to acquire the sword. Getting past the guards was far easier than either Naruto or Plagueis imagined it would be. Naruto was trying to suppress his chakra and even using his force powers to help suppress it. He was also using a very basic jutsu to actively eliminate any scent trail that he might leave behind. Naruto silently made his way down the shadowed hallways of the Hokage Tower. He could sense where the guards were as Plagueis had taught him how to properly sense ninja with the force. It was difficult to learn, but Naruto was able to accomplish it. The trick was to sense a void in the force which corresponded to a ninja whose chakra was preventing the force from entering his body. The patrols were moving exactly how the Jonin had said they would. Naruto found the room and the door wasn't even locked. Entering the dark room, he knew where the traps were and made sure not to set them off. The room was some kind of library or study as it had bookshelves on most of the walls and a desk in one corner. He went to the wall that a secret room was supposedly behind and which held the items they were after. Naruto found the hidden mechanism and triggered it. The part of the wall swung open to reveal the room, and Naruto made sure to not set off any of the alarms at the opening. A handle to a weapon was sitting in a display case along with a scroll. Naruto stared at the handle as it reminded him of something that his master had described to him many times. Over the shared link, Naruto asked, "Master, is that a lightsaber?" But he received no answer as Plagueis' mind was a jumble of thoughts concerning this new development. Naruto was about to say something else when he felt his master urge him to complete what they were here to do. Before he left, Naruto pasted an exploding tag to the wall at the entrance of the library room. He had timed how long it took him to get past the guards, into the building, and into the secret room. Ninja were always punctual, and that would work to his advantage. Naruto walked down the street while wearing a dark cloak. The cloak was a survival cloak from the ship. He decided to use it to further hide his features while stealing from the Hokage Tower. Naruto was traveling to an apartment building. The specific room that he was looking for belonged to Rakusho Aoi, who was the Jonin that wanted his genin student to steal the items from the Hokage Tower. As Naruto went through a shadowed area, he emerged in the henge of the genin that Aoi had convinced would become a chunin upon successfully taking the items he held. That genin was named Marino Idate, though Naruto didn't actually know that. It was still 20 minutes or more before Idate was supposed to infiltrate the Hokage Tower, so Naruto had plenty of time for what he needed to accomplish. Walking into the apartment building, he headed for a specific apartment. The henge Naruto found the correct apartment and knocked. It took a moment before Aoi answered the door and came face to face with his student who was supposed to be stealing a scroll and sword for him in just a little while. Aoi was of average height with green spiky hair and blue eyes. He was rather surprised to see his Idate at his home when he opened the door. Did he back out? Has he figured out the test was a fake? Aoi thought as his arm went for a kunai behind the door. If his student wasn't going to steal for him, then he would have to silence his student and make sure no one could find out about his treachery until it was too late. Before Aoi got the chance to get to the kunai, Idate held up his hand as if to say stop and Aoi was launched back against a wall in his small apartment. His blurred vision no longer saw his student standing in the doorway, but that of a cloaked figure reminiscent of an Anbu, but with no porcelain mask. Aoi tried to get up and went for his weapons. He had no idea what was going on, but something had gone wrong and he needed to get out of here. The cloaked figure stepped into the apartment and held up his hand again in a gripping motion. In an instant, Aoi couldn't move his body. His hand still had several kunai in it that he had been about to throw. It was as if some unseen force was holding him in place and not letting him move at all. He couldn't even breathe or call out for help and it was slowly squeezing him harder. The cloaked figure walked towards him and the apartment door closed behind him without any help. While still immobilized, Aoi tried everything that he could think of to break loose. He thought perhaps he was in a gain jutsu, but when he tried to dispel it, nothing happened. Though he was a jonin, he was terrified at this point and thought he was going to be killed. He watched helplessly as the figure stopped just a foot away from him. He couldn't see any eyes as the cloak shadowed the face. The figure's other hand lifted up and went to Aoi's head. As soon as it made contact, Aoi felt pain and everything started going black. Naruto exited the apartment building out into an alley and made his way to his own apartment building. Looking at his watch he noticed that he was a little early and had to wait for the right time. A minute passed before Naruto made a single hand seal and in the distance he could hear the faint sound of an explosion. He walked up the stairs of the building his apartment was on top of and unlocked his front door. The explosion was timed to coincide with the moment that Aoi's genin would have entered the Hokage Tower and found the same secret room that Naruto had. At some point between getting the secret room open and realizing that the items he was supposed to acquire were already gone, Naruto detonated the tag. It was very unlikely that the blast would have killed the genin, since Naruto was rather sure of the timing. It was just to alert all the ninja in the area that something had happened in the Hokage Tower. They would all come running and find a genin in a restricted area and 2 items missing. Naruto had thought about stealing more items from the tower, but he only had information on the layout and trap set in the room that Aoi had talked about. It was possible that he could have been caught if he had ventured elsewhere. It would take some time to interrogate the genin and find out what he was doing there and what was going on. After that, Ninja would be sent to find Rakusho Aoi and reach a dead end. Naruto took off the cloak and hid it, along with the sword, scroll, and several other items taken from the Jonin's apartment inside of a secret compartment that he had created in his apartment. It already had several other items that he didn't want anyone to find if they searched his home. He had thought of going back to the hideout, but if anyone saw him near the Hokage tower, they would no doubt question him. Naruto had no idea what was involved with a ninja interrogation and wasn't eager to find out. Asande Ami sat behind his desk as two men entered the room. One of them was Marino Ibiki, older brother of the genin that had been caught not 20 minutes earlier and a high-ranking member of the Anbu Torture Interrogation Division. The second was Yamanaka Inoichi, the head of the Anbu Torture and Interrogation Division. It was technically a conflict of interest to have Ibiki work on a case concerning his own family member, but the man was known for being a professional, no matter what the circumstances were. Were the items recovered? Asked the Hokage as he wanted answers concerning who had stolen a priceless artifact that had belonged to the Nidaime. Inoichi stepped forward and said, "The items were not recovered, Hokage-sama. I have confirmed with a mindwalk that Marino Idate was told by his Jonin sensei that he could pass the Chunin exams through alternate means. His sensei, Rakusho Aoi, told him where the Raijin and scroll were and how to get to them. Idate then infiltrated this building and attempted to steal the items, only to find that they were already gone. Then he was supposed to throw us off the trail, giving Rakusho-san more time to escape." Asked the Hokage as he believed that Aoi had taken the items earlier and created a distraction in order to buy himself time to leave the village with the sword and scroll. "I'm afraid not. The Anbu found Rakusho-san in his apartment unconscious. It appeared as though there was a struggle, but there were no signs of forced entry to the apartment and no one seems to have heard anything out of the ordinary. The Raijin and scroll were not found at the scene and there was no evidence that Rakusho-san ever had them in his possession. It's possible that Rakusho-san knew his attacker and allowed him entry to his apartment, or the attacker entered through other means. Rakusho-san looked as though he was ready to go on a mission, but he wasn't scheduled for one. His bank account was emptied the day before, but we didn't find any money in the apartment or on his person. We took him back to HQ to delve deeper into the theft and what his involvement really was. Upon further investigation, with a mindwalk, I was unable to find anything further," stated Inoichi seriously. The Hokage raised an eyebrow as it wasn't often that Inoichi wasn't able to find anything. Unless Rakusho was dead, then he should have been able to find something. Inoichi saw the confusion and elaborated, "I attempted to enter his mind, but found nothing." "Nothing?" the Sandaime asked in a confused voice. "Yes, Hokage-sama. I entered his mind and found nothing. No memories and no information of any kind," stated Inoichi, and the Sandaime could tell that the findings had surprised the clan head. "So his memories are gone. What would cause that?" the Sandaime asked while trying to think of any techniques that he had heard or come across that could do something like that. "I'm not completely sure. While my clan does have knowledge of how to extract information, we don't have many techniques that can implant or erase memories. I can think of one forbidden technique that would completely erase a person's memories, but this would cause debilitating damage to the brain and leave the subject comatose. In this case, Rakusho-san is completely fine, apart from having no memories. He can still function and could relearn all that he has lost. I don't really see him as an enemy of the village anymore," said Inoichi. The Sandaime thought about what had happened and said, "Do you have any other information to report? Did the search teams find anything?" "No, Hokage-sama. I really don't have much else to say. From what we can tell, no one entered or left the village and we had several teams search the surrounding area for any signs of a fleeing person but found nothing. It's obvious that there was a third person that Rakusho-san may have been working with, but we can find no evidence of anyone else. Idate-san has no knowledge of another person, just his sensei," finished Inoichi. The Sandaime sighed as a memento of his sensei was now gone. The Raijin was a rather famous sword but hadn't been used for decades. He was angry that it had been stolen, but even angrier that whoever it was that stole it had eluded everyone in the village. Not only that, but there was no one to punish for the theft. No one could be placed in the bingo book since they had no information about who attacked Rakusho. Marino Idate was only guilty of trusting his sensei, and Rakusho Aoi was no longer in his right mind or even had a mind anymore. It was a dead end. Any plans for Naruto secretly entering the Chunin exams were put on hold for another time. The sword, scroll, and all the information obtained from Rakusho Aoi's mind were far more important than anything else during the following day. It was a weekend, so Naruto didn't have school and could spend most of his time in their hideout. Flag-A's had been left sealed on Naruto's arm and had spent the night sifting through all of the information that Naruto had ripped from the Jonin's head. Drain knowledge was a force technique that Plagueis had taught Naruto specifically for what it had been used it for the previous day. Naruto had taken bits and pieces of a variety of different topics. For those who had not mastered the technique, it is very possible to destroy the memories of the subject it is used on. In this case, it was done on purpose to hide any involvement with the theft. Aoi wasn't a ninjutsu user, but did know the basics for learning water nature affinity. Naruto was eager to start learning, unfortunately the Jonin didn't know any water jutsu. He also knew very little about game jutsu, nothing more about the illusions than what Naruto had learned in the academy. Aoi had mainly used weapons and poison. The poison knowledge was valuable to Naruto as he now knew how to prepare several different types of poison from local plants. Besides that knowledge, Aoi knew several things about Konoha itself that neither Naruto or his master were aware of. The village apparently had a barrier surrounding it to detect anyone entering through any means other than the village gates. Plagueis was rather interested in the barrier system as he had never seen anything like it that didn't involve sophisticated sensor equipment that could be fooled. The barrier didn't have many weaknesses to it and Aoi knew the password to get through it. Now Naruto knew that password. All in all, Naruto had learned many useful things from the Jonin but was left wondering something. He simply couldn't determine how Rakusho Aoi had been promoted to Jonin. The man wasn't really that dangerous or powerful and had very little in the way of ninjutsu, genjutsu, or even taijutsu. The only thing the man could use were weapons and poison. Somehow that had been enough to get him promoted. Naruto and Plagueis had envisioned Jonin ninja as being very powerful and proficient in most ninja skills, but it turned out that not all of them were. It made them rethink their previous notions and plans to take jutsu from the Konoha ninja library as it didn't seem that difficult anymore. Furthermore, Naruto had managed to break into a building that was supposed to be one of the most secure in the village and stole 2 items from it without being caught. The traps that Naruto had bypassed weren't that difficult to notice or get around. After bypassing what they had found the previous day, they would have to reconsider several old plans that they the previous believed were too difficult to accomplish. They would definitely have to wait though as the village would be on high alert for a while. Most of the day was spent with Plagueis having Naruto examine the sword in detail and activate it to see what it could do. The weapon sounded and activated like a lightsaber, but the blade was made from electrical energy. Oddly, the blade seemed solid and could cut but only slightly better than a normal sword. It could also discharge the energy it held when coming in contact with someone, but it really wasn't that powerful of a discharge and probably would only stun a ninja for a short time. Naruto was only stunned for a brief moment. A civilian would most likely be knocked out by the discharge though. Naruto couldn't examine most of the blade because he couldn't find a way to open it up and see what was inside. Whatever was inside the blade and causing it to create the electrical energy was sealed inside, and unless he wanted to break the handle and risk breaking the sword, he wasn't going to be able to examine it any further. From preliminary investigation, Naruto concluded that the sword had a few interesting features, but wasn't nearly as good as what Plagueis told him a lightsaber was. The cutting ability wasn't that impressive, but Plagueis thought that perhaps Naruto didn't know how to properly use the blade to its full potential. Plagueis could feel that Naruto's chakra was being used to power the blade, and it was possible that the chakra going into the blade could be manipulated to produce better results. Unfortunately, as Plagueis explained to Naruto, the blade wasn't very useful to them at this point in time. Naruto couldn't be seen using it, and since they couldn't find out how it worked, another blade couldn't be created, and it would be too suspicious if Naruto did create something similar. They would have to work on the discovery at a later date, preferably when they had the equipment to examine the inside of the device without damaging it. The scroll Naruto stole seemed to have the same problem, he couldn't open it. It was sealed in some way, and he just hoped that it wasn't a blood seal which might involve blood from the Nidaime, who had been dead for nearly 50 years. Plagueis, however, had a way around that. He touched the scroll and focused on using a force power called Pashometry, which was a rare ability that allowed someone to touch an object and see what events surrounded the object. This power would allow Plagueis to actually experience the events surrounding the object as if he was there with his own senses and feel what others felt who used the object. Plagueis had tried to use the same power on the Raijin, but only found images of the Nidaime Hokage using the weapon, and he couldn't view anything past that to see who had created the weapon and how. That probably meant that the sword was very old and had been used by many different people before the Nidaime had ever started using it. Plagueis was by no means a master of Pashometry, but he could get some images and feelings concerning the scroll and Raijin. The scroll was much easier to see as only 3 people had ever come into contact with it, the Nidaime, the Sandaime, and Naruto, and it wasn't created that long ago. The contact with the scroll from Naruto and the Sandaime was minimal, so it was easier to see the other person who came into contact with it. The scroll had been written by the Nidaime and contained all of his water jutsu. It was supposed to be presented, along with Irajin, to a ninja of Konoha that showed a similar talent and affinity for water that the Nidaime Hokage possessed. Since the man's death, nearly 50 years prior, no one had ever shown the same skills for water jutsu that the Nidaime had, and thus the scroll and sword had never been passed down to someone else. Along with witnessing the creation of the scroll, Plagueis could also see the set of hand seals that was required to open the lock on the scroll. Naruto went through the required hand seals, and the scroll opened. Looking through the long list, Naruto found every water jutsu that the Nidaime Hokage had ever used or invented. Naruto had a broad smile on his face as he could now start training to use water nature chakra with the information from Aoi's mind, and he had a list of powerful jutsu to go along with it. 1 week later, walking through the back alleys of the village. While Naruto had spent most of his free time working on learning water manipulation by making a dry leaf become soaked, he was also learning how ancient Jedi created their swords. It was outlined in his master's texts that were in the ship. Most of the information on the holocron was locked by the object's gatekeeper, and because Naruto was considered a Sith, it would not let him learn anything further. Plagueis had managed to unlock certain information from the holocron, but nothing more than the methods for forging a sword. The process was relatively easy, and Naruto found himself questioning whether or not it was correct. Apparently all he needed was the desired metal to make the sword from, a furnace, and the force. When going through the ritual that the holocron outlined, he only needed to use and feel the force in order to create his own unique weapon. Naruto was surprised that he didn't actually need to know anything about forging weaponry, as the force was supposed to guide him through the process. Considering how much it cost to get the chakra metal and the fact that he would have to pay to use someone's furnace, Naruto was thankful that he managed to get some extra metal from the starship. He could have made the entire sword from the metal he had from the starship, but the swords of the past were made of rare metals that Naruto didn't have access to. To compensate for that, he would use Sith alchemy to combine the properties of many different metals together. While chakra metal was strong, it was nowhere near as strong as the metals from the starship. However, the chakra metal would enhance any chakra put into it and allow the metal to use nature chakra. The metal from the starship mostly came from the B pit door, which had been cut open and was now just a useless slab of metal. The Jedi ritual for creating a sword required a single alloy, which would be the combined metal that Naruto was going to create. The forging of the metal would create a blade that was incredibly durable, razor sharp, and able to block lightsabers. Naruto also had a Sith ritual that could be used to make the blade even stronger, help it retain its edge, and even act as a focusing point for his dark side powers, and perhaps even amplify them. The single blade would be a merging of several different methods and rituals to create a very unique weapon for Naruto. Plagueis was rather interested in what the outcome would be. He had never seen a Sith sword before, but had read many different texts concerning them. Naruto only had enough money for the chakra metal and to use the furnace, so he would only have a single attempt until he managed to get more money. He was rather nervous as he had never performed any kind of ritual before or forged a weapon. Plagueis would be there to give him pointers and monitor the process, but only Naruto would be able to perform the rituals, as it had to be his channeling of the force into the metal that would craft the blade and apparently form some kind of bond with him. Plagueis had no idea what the addition of chakra and chakra metal into the process might do, or what the final result would be. This would be the first time in possibly several thousand years that a sword would be created using the methods that he had discovered in the scrolls and the holocron. The Jedi had completely stopped using swords almost 4,000 years ago, and the Sith perhaps even a little longer. Not only could Plagueis witness the creation of the blade, but he would be guiding its creation. The weapons shop that Naruto had chosen to forge his sword in was the Higurashi weapons shop and was supposed to be one of the best in the village. Naruto entered the shop and had all the required materials with him and scrolls. Plagueis' holocron was sealed in his arm, and he also had the other holocron sealed in a separate scroll in one of his ninja pouches. Naruto went straight to the counter so he could speak to the owner of the shop. Tenten had a slow day at her family's shop. Nothing really interesting had happened, as she usually liked to help customers choose the weapons and supplies that was right for their needs, despite her being only 9. She had been working at the store for a couple of years and had grown up surrounded by weapons and basic ninja supplies of every variety. She was attending the counter and flipping through a supply catalog while her father was in the back of the building working at the furnace. Their shop did sell generic ninja items, but they also made their own weapons to sell to ninja clients in the village. Some people wanted better gear and weapons than the regular ninja items, and their shop could supply them. While turning the next page in her catalog, the bell at the door rang to announce that a customer had entered. Tenten wasn't able to give the customer her standard greeting, as the words had died in her throat. She had instantly recognized the boy that had walked into her family's store. It was the same boy that had been skipped ahead a grade into her class. He had stayed in her grade for less than a year before he left the class. Tenten really didn't know that much about him. He was always quiet during class, had no friends, and didn't try to make any friends. The only time she had heard him speak was when asked questions during lecture, and he really liked to ask a lot of questions. Tenten later found out that the reason he had left her class was because he had been skipped ahead another grade. She couldn't understand why he had been skipped ahead as Ugoniji was also in her grade and was considered a genius of his clan, yet he was never offered the chance to skip grades too. No one seemed to know any information about Uzumaki Naruto, which was the boy's name and the most detailed information she knew about him. Anyone that she talked to was tight-lipped about anything that concerned the boy. Even her father wasn't willing to tell her much about him, thought she could tell that he knew something. As the boy walked to the counter, his hood and high collar obscured most of his face. There was always something unnerving about the boy, and it made Tenten shiver as the boy looked at her. Tenten was about to say something when the boy spoke first. "I'd like to speak to the owner of this establishment." The tone of the voice was probably made to sound friendly, but it was dull, and there was an underlying tone of command in it. Tenten was actually rather thankful that she didn't have to speak to him and called for her father. She then stepped back and away from the counter as her father came into the main shop from the back room and walked to the counter. "My name is Tageru and I own this shop. What is it that I can do for you?" asked the man in a serious voice. He knew who the shadowed figure was, but he wasn't going to turn away a paying customer. "I would like to use your furnace for the rest of the afternoon," said Naruto, and Tageru raised an eyebrow at the request. He had numerous requests for specialty weapons and customization, but no one had ever asked to use his furnace. "If it's a weapon you want, I can make just about anything," stated Tageru, but Naruto wasn't interested. "The weapon is one that I will make myself, I simply need to use your furnace," and before Tageru could object or say anything, Naruto continued, "and I'm willing to pay." With that said, Naruto took out a stack of ryo from his jacket and placed it on the counter. Tageru looked at the money on the table. It was a good amount, but he wasn't sure. He didn't let anyone else touch his tools, but before he could make his concerns known, Naruto spoke again. "I brought my own tools, I just need your furnace for the afternoon and a few simple materials." Tageru thought about it. His tools were very important to him, but since the boy wasn't going to use them, then it shouldn't be much of a problem. A boy that young and with no experience making weapons shouldn't be able to make anything. "I wonder what he plans on doing?" questioned Tageru. "Exactly why do you need my furnace again?" asked Tageru, and Naruto refrained from rolling his eyes. "I want to make a weapon and I don't need any help, just a few materials and the use of the furnace. Metal will cost a little bit more than you have on the table," stated Tageru, and Naruto responded, "I already have the metal, I just need a crucible and some materials for the handle, as well as a sheath." To say that Tageru was curious was now an understatement. Even Tenten, who was still standing off to the side and watching the negotiation, was very curious about what the boy planned on making. With no prior experience or skills at forging anything, the weapon would most likely be a failure, and Tenten couldn't see any tools or metal on the boy's person. A moment of silence ensued as Naruto and Tageru just looked at each other from across the countertop. It was finally ended when Tageru spoke. "You can use my furnace and a crucible, but if anything gets damaged, you're paying for it. You can come to me about handle materials and a sheath after you've made whatever it is you're going to make," stated Tageru as he took the stack of bills off the table and counted it to see how much it really was. Naruto nodded and proceeded to go to the back room. Tageru was still wary about this deal, but it was a good amount of money, and the boy said he only needed the afternoon. It was worth a risk, and unless the boy destroyed his furnace, which was highly unlikely, he would make quite a profit tonight. If anything did happen, he could always go to the Hokage. Naruto shut the door behind him and went to work. He laid out his storage scrolls with the metal, tools, and vibration technology in them, and unsealed the first two. A crucible would be used to combine the two chunks of metal that he had together and make them into one single metal with Sith alchemy. He would then perform the required Sith rituals for amplifying the metal and use the GD forging method to create the sword. After the sword was complete, he would add in the vibration technology to it, make the handle, and get a sheath for it. Taking the metals, he placed them into the crucible. With some chanting in the ancient Sith language, the process began and he placed the crucible into the furnace, which would begin to melt the metal. The metal from the ship was far stronger and resilient, but the ritual would make it easier to melt. Naruto removed the crucible from the furnace several times to continue the ritual until the metals melted. He poured the force into the crucible and even some of his chakra when he put it in and took it out of the furnace. The molten metal underwent one last ritual session, and Naruto then added his own blood into the crucible. The combining ritual had been completed and needed to sit in the furnace for a little while longer. After that was over, Naruto removed the molten metal and poured it into a rectangular mold. The mold would give it a basic shape before it spent time in the furnace and was shaped. After the metal had cooled in the mold, Naruto removed it and put it in a solution of water and his own blood to further cool. The slab of metal was removed and Naruto proceeded to the forging part of the process. The GD ritual began with saying a few phrases in an ancient language that he had memorized and simultaneously adding the force to metal. Despite Naruto never shaping or forging a blade, the ritual would help him along, and the force would guide him along the way. Naruto had to mediate with the metal for a given amount of time and create a bond with the metal before he made it into a sword. Naruto had used the force to force air into the furnace and make it much hotter than normal. The rituals he used also seemed to enhance the flame. He placed the metal bar into the furnace and let it sit for a while. The bar was removed from the furnace and shaped with a hammer that Naruto had brought from the ship. The force and some chakra were imbued into the hammer and the metal bar through the tongs Naruto was holding it steady with. Naruto let the force guide him to shaping his blade. He wasn't sure exactly what blade would be created as he was so deep in concentration that he really didn't notice anything around him or the metal he was working with. Even when Plagueis tried to talk with him, he got no response in return. At several points during the forging process, either Togaru or Tenten would open the door and peek through the slit to see what Naruto was up to. Thankfully, the Sith alchemy was already over when they had done this, as it would be strange if they heard him chanting in an unknown language. Plagueis watched enraptured as Naruto continued to shape the blade for hours. The room was filled with the rhythm of hammering and the heat of the furnace. His students seemed to be in a trance and focused solely on his task. Plagueis was able to glean very little from Naruto's mind as it seemed rather blank at the moment. The only thing Naruto was thinking about was the GD ritual that they had been going over for the past week. Interestingly, the hammering was more than just shaping the blade as it seemed to push the force into the blade and let the force work on refining the shape and giving the blade an edge. With just a few more sessions of heat and hammering, the sword was done. Naruto put it in the solution of water and blood to cool. He sat down and blinked several times as he had finally come back to reality. From what the holocron said, the blade wouldn't need sharpening and should even come out being so polished that a person could see their reflection in it. Naruto took a pair of tongs and removed it from the water. The sword that came out was rather interesting. The metal appeared to be completely blood red, while the areas near the cutting edge darkened and hardened until it was black. The sword was an injado, but had half of the back edge of the sword sharpened as well, so it wasn't a completely double-sided sword and featured the standard tip of an injado. Naruto and Plagueis took time examining the entire blade. It had no tools marks or imperfections, and Naruto could see his reflection in the blood-red metal. He tested the edge of the blade and found that it was razor sharp. His finger barely made any contact with the edge and now sported a nice cut. When Naruto had finished examining his work, he went to the scroll with the vibration equipment in it. Unsealing the scroll, Naruto attached the technology to the tang of the blade and made sure that it was positioned exactly how it had been on the vibro blade he had taken it from. Naruto had altered this piece of vibration technology to work off of his chakra instead of the battery that it normally had. Once he placed the guard and handle on the blade, no one would know that it was even there. The guard was a piece of metal that he had cut off from the rest before he had started using the furnace. He fitted the guard onto the blade and went to talk with Togaru. Naruto made sure to cover the blade with something so that neither the owner nor his daughter would see the strange technology that was fitted to the handle. The handle of the blade would be covered with wood that had been grown with chakra being fed to the tree. Togaru showed Naruto how to properly make the handle from an example that he had started earlier that day. Naruto carved out enough room for the handles to fit over the vibration technology and then proceeded to wrap the blade with black ray skin. Once everything was in place, he revealed the sword to the others at the shop. He wasn't sure why he did it. Perhaps it was to satisfy their curiosity and so they wouldn't ask questions, or maybe it was just his own hubris at creating such a weapon. The owner was shocked and his daughter was gaping. They had never seen a sword quite like the one that Naruto had made. Several questions were asked, but Naruto merely answered that it was his own creation and therefore he didn't have to tell anyone how he had made it. The owner eyed Naruto wearily as he left the shop and his daughter was determined to find out more about the blade and how a boy with no training could make one of the most interesting swords she had ever seen. End chapter. So this part ends here. If you want to see next part of this series, like the video now and share the story with your friends. Bye bye.